Okay, welcome to the special committee of the whole meeting. It's Thursday, December 5th at 5:34. I don't know, so who wants to call the roll? We should have probably settled that earlier. Okay, thanks.
Roll call, Vice President Russell.
Here.
Councilor Cobb.
Here.
Councilor Petrus. Councilor Larson here, and President Kuda.
I'm here.
And
And-
Anthony.
And Anthony Maddox is appearing on virtual. He's up there on the wall.
Good evening.
All right, and Jim Posh is on his way, Councilman Posh. Let's see, this is mostly about the budget. We met on Monday and there were lots of questions. Those questions were emailed to the mayor. And we decided to do a special meeting today to go through as many of those questions as we can. I do want to just go back to something that we talked about on Monday.
Is it possible, could I update council on something really quick before we start?
Well, this is an update as well, so let me do my update and then you do yours and we'll be ready to go. On Monday, I was putting up a PowerPoint about what is going on with the 2023 audit. And there were three things that weren't quite right. And so here's what I did. Sorry about the font size, but can everybody look up here just for a second? I just emailed this just to check everything out. So it is true that Cleveland Heights has not yet received our 2023 audit. Kyle Doherty from Zupka and Associates is indeed the subcontracted person doing our audit. The city has hired Sean Hart and Associates to assist with the preparation of our financial statements. Sean Hart has not yet received the info from our finance department to finish the 2023 financial statements. And Doherty did try to follow up with our interim finance director who's no longer with us. And then, and this is from an email. So Kyle Doherty actually went through this to make sure everything was accurate. And the unaudited financial statements have not been prepared by our financial department. The original date to file unaudited statements with the state auditor was May 29th, 2024. The city had received a 1-month filing an extension through June 28th, 2024. The financial statements must be prepared before Zupka and Associates can complete their audit. So I just want to summarize this. Let me make sure this is the summary. Okay, so I just want you to picture this so you know what's going on. Alan Aldred is the actual auditor assigned to do the 2023 audit.
From the state?
From the state.
Okay.
He subcontracted that to Kyle Doherty from Zupka and Associates. Cleveland Heights hired Sean Hart and Associates to assist with the preparation. And I want you to know he apologized profusely for saying it was, this is on the corrections, saying it was the Julian Group. The city's unaudited financial statements have not been prepared. And I actually just read that already. And he wanted us to know that regardless, they will not be able to complete the audit by the end of this year, even if they got everything they needed today. So the corrections from Monday are that Sean Hart was hired by Cleveland Heights, not the Julian Group and not Zupka, because those things were said at the meeting and they were incorrect. Again, apologies from Doherty. The unaudited financial statements are not complete. The mayor did say they were complete. This was confirmed by both the subcontracting auditor and Alan Aldred, the person that's responsible for this. So that's where we sit with the audit. I just don't want people to be waiting for that because again, it's not gonna happen. Mayor, go ahead. You want some updates as well?
Yeah, so it was a similar conversation. Actually, I had some conversation with both Zupka and Sean Hart. about this because there were failures on the part of staff here to provide information. But I did want to at least mention, I had a conversation with Mr. Allred as well previous to that. And my understanding from him was that there was some additional specific review that they wanted to do in-house of some other issues. And that the 23 audit wouldn't be complete until those things were reviewed by the auditor of state's office directly as opposed to through some other contracted entity.
Do they tell you the same thing, that kind of like no matter what, how quickly stuff gets done now, they will not be able to do anything this calendar year?
What I was informed by the state auditor's office is that until they are done with their review, their in-house review of those other issues, they would not be releasing anything anyway. They'd be holding it no matter what.
Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead.
If I could, did they say like what those issues are? Did they go into detail and like a timeline for when they feel like it might be done?
I am going to refrain from discussing that in this meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
this is a question for the law director. Would his recommendation be that we don't discuss anything further with this in terms of additional information or anything with the auditor, or would it be acceptable to discuss at this meeting at all?
I think it is better to refrain from further discussion, as the mayor just indicated, with regard to a more specific question.
Very good, thank you so much.
I don't have any other questions anyway. Okay, so kind of as the first order of business, why don't we just start with questions that council has about the budget in general. And we can get into specific legislative points as well afterward. I mean, I would just say Director Klingscale's here for, Director Klingscale, what time do you have to go? I want to make sure that nobody has to sit.
If I can go first, but I still have a little bit of work to do, if I can go first.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody, and you mean for questions, right? Okay.
So the mayor shared some of the info that he learned from you, but just to clarify, so with regard to the 400,000 for traffic calming, I know that part of it went to Harcourt, if I remember correctly.
Right,
Part of it went to South Taylor before the intersection with Fairmount.
right.
And could you remind me what else the money was?
The roundabout on Caledonia.
Okay, yeah.
And some of the traffic pattern changes that we did at Mount Vista and Parkdale.
Okay.
And then we also purchased some equipment, we purchased some traffic speed tables that we have not identified where they're gonna go.
Okay. Have we used all 400,000, or will we, do you think, towards the end of the year?
Not before then.
Okay. And then one other question, maybe this is also for the mayor. So I know that we received the $800,000 grant from the Department of Transportation. Is the administration requesting anything in excess of that for traffic calming for 2025, like a transfer of the unused money from 24 to 25, or?
Well,
I would like to have the money that was not used in 2024 transferred to 2025. Because there were certain things that we would have liked to have gotten done, but we ran out of time because we were trying to get all the capital projects that we have.
Okay. Do you know about how much that was?
Whatever the balance is, it's
So
about
you're looking-
180.
180 maybe?
180.
Okay. So the 180 is sufficient then? The 800,000 grant plus the 180?
And we have a $200,000 match.
That's right.
for that 80. So it's a total of $1 million in that particular Safe Streets for All planning and demonstration grant with our match in additional 180 to complete something.
So question, could the 180 that we're moving from 24 to 25 count towards that 200,000?
I suppose it might, but no, I don't think it could. No, because I believe the way that the grant broke down, there are specific things that our match is being applied to within that grant. And the things that the director is talking about using that money for wouldn't necessarily apply to the necessary things in our application in the grant award.
Okay.
Or our match. So I don't think that it could.
Okay.
I mean, some of it might, if there's overlap there, but I wouldn't want to rely on that.
Okay. And I guess one last question, do we think that it would be feasible to start installing some of that equipment that we've purchased like in the spring?
Probably late spring, yeah,
Okay.
I would say late spring, because what we're waiting on now is we're gonna be analyzing some of the speed data that we get back to identify where we're gonna be installing those speed tables.
And I guess just a general comment is that, and I've said this before, my feeling is that I feel very strongly that Lee Road is unsafe, as many of us already know, and that we need things that will physically slow cars down. And it's great to hear that we purchased some speed tables. And, you know, even Councilman Posh, this was 3 months ago now, whenever you were having breakfast at Stone Oven, someone was unfortunately struck by a car right there. And so I think that the sooner we can install things specifically on that road and elsewhere, the better and safer our communities will be.
We'll
So,
certainly take a look at Lee Road, make that a priority.
Thank you.
That area.
I appreciate it.
Because we have been looking at the area around the library and going towards, see.
I know, like, for myself, anytime that I'm at one of the crosswalks, I feel like lights create a false sense of security for people because, you know, people might say like, oh, you know, I want a stoplight, I want like a traffic signal, something like that. But oftentimes cars will go through it. And that's my experience standing at those crosswalks on Lee Road. A lot of drivers don't respect them. And so really excited by the idea of maybe installing, you know, some speed tables, speed bumps, something like that. So thank you, I appreciate it.
You know, just in the interest of being efficient with the director's time, any other questions for Director Clinkscale from council?
Was there a question about the new sewer combo truck that we have on the agenda for legislation?
Is that
It
for,
was from MTech, it was a factor, I believe that there was a question regarding that purchase.
I asked if the sewer district was actually picking up the tab for that, or if we were trading a vehicle in.
No, the sewer district is picking up the tab for that. We only have one Vector currently, so that's gonna be in addition to the Vector that we've had now for about 6 or 7 years.
Are they picking up the full price of it?
Yes,
So we don't need to do any kind of budget
No,
modification
we would
in
still
order
need
to do
to.
that?
We would still need to do that.
Yes,
In
we
order
would.
to spend the money, even if the money's coming from, they're not paying for it directly. So we would have to budget for it.
it's like a reimbursement, so you'll see the expenditure, we have to allow for the expenditure. And then you'll see the grant coming in through revenue and intergovernmental revenue.
And I think that was reflected in the memo, but I think maybe next time we can do sort of a more clear breakdown of costs for that kind of thing.
That's similar to how we're getting the brine equipment where we have to show the expenditure, even though the funding will be coming in, we have to pay for it first. It's a reimbursement.
So it's really not coming out of any kind of capital budget or anything like that. You're gonna put money in a fund from the sewer district and we're just gonna pay for it. Or you're
It's gonna
probably,
be like a wash. You know,
Yes,
we're
I
gonna
get
pay for it and then we're gonna get the reimbursement.
that's probably something that we wanna make sure that we can carve out, keep separate for
Right.
the January or December 9th meeting.
yeah, because it's gonna look like we have less than we do.
Right.
I mean, for some period of time. Any other questions for Director Clinkscale? All right, thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Do you guys wanna talk to the other directors first? And then we got the chief here and we got Director Gonzalez. I mean, just in, you know, in the interest of their time. And then we can get to the, you know, bigger picture stuff.
I'll be around for a little bit if you guys have any other questions.
I'm in no hurry if you want. I'm in no hurry.
Same here,
Oh, okay,
either or.
that's good.
No worries.
Councilman Posh, do you wanna start with your some of the questions that you had emailed the mayor?
Sure, well, I guess I'm just going with with item number one. I assume everybody has copies of these.
Yeah.
And they're available, and the first one is the ARPA spreadsheet. It's still deficient in the areas of trying to see where the expenses, if a particular item was either expenses or was encumbered, and
So we're gonna get that, we talked about that this morning. We're gonna get that Monday. And I mean, that's what,
I think it's gonna address the deficiencies that you noted.
but we don't have it today.
sure we're gonna get it Monday.
That's what we talked about this morning. So,
Okay. I mean, it's getting really, really close to the end of the month. We've asked for this over and over and again. It's gotta be out there. You guys have gotta be using this in your work product. I just don't understand why we can't have it now. Why didn't we have it weeks ago? So in order to kind of analyze on where we are coming from a capital budget from last year to this year, when I say last year, I mean the 24 budget, the 25 budget, you know, we really need to have an update of those things in the capital budget that were completed or not completed and where we are with those, because that's gonna help us figure out what the carryovers are. Do you have any status on that for us?
No, and I think probably the best way to do that is in part to start with that the ARPA spreadsheet that you'll be getting. And I can continue to work on the I keep thinking embargoed. Sorry. The contracts that have been executed over the course of the year. And I suppose council would have seen most of those, but we can go through that. I'm not prepared to talk about that right now.
So it's a little bit more than ARPA. This is things like the fire engine that we were sort of working through, and I just use that as an example.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the splash pad, I came in on the conversation about the traffic calming. You know, these are all things that were, you know, put into a capital budget and they're sitting out there. It would seem to me that you could just kind of print out a report and find out what was spent and what wasn't spent on these items, which is what I think we really need is, I think what you would use as a starting point to figure out, well, are we gonna carry over or we're not gonna carry over these items?
So I think some of those things that you just mentioned, we've discussed a little bit in these meetings. But in terms of getting you sort of a document that is digestible and useful to you, we're still working on that. So, but we'll get that to you as soon as possible.
Mayor Sarin, what's the most recent financial statement we have? Do we have October 31 done?
No, we do not. So
September 30 is the last one then.
September, yeah, the third quarter is the last that was provided.
Thank you.
just so I know what I'm listening to now, I know that we may, I don't know if everybody did this, but there were questions mailed to the mayor. And Mayor, did you send answers to those questions to people?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I just wanna make sure that there wasn't anything that we could be looking at as we go through this. Councilman Posh, did you wanna go any further?
Actually, before we do,
Yeah, sure.
a little bit more response. I did want to take a moment and introduce Mr. Willie Feltz, who has been brought on to provide assistance in the finance department on a temporary basis, on a temporary contracted basis. He's in the role as an acting finance director, and we'll be sitting down attempting to work through some of the issues that we're discovering and correct those and get you the information that you need. Good.
Can we ask some questions?
You can, but he just started on Tuesday.
Well, I know, okay, so it's like, what's on this line, this line? We're not gonna get that tonight. I get that and I respect it. I'm glad to see that we've got someone here. I have one question for staff and I have kind of a question. Can you tell us your experience? Are you part of a firm? Are you an independent consultant? I mean, have you done municipal funding before?
I came with an agency. I have some state experience at a state level, a little bit of city. And I've mainly worked in hospitals the last 35 years in controller positions, CFO positions.
Okay.
And like I was telling the mayor when we first spoke, that and sort of debits and credits are credits, and I do understand encumbrances in city government.
And you work with any ARPA funding or anything like that?
I have not, but I made an analogy. We had CARES funds.
Sure.
And with CARES funds, they're treated the same way as ARPA. You gotta account for it. You gotta do the single audit. You gotta make sure that you use the money for what it's intended for. And if you don't, you have to write a check, and you have to keep very good records so your audit goes well and you don't have to pay any money back. Pretty much the same as the CARES funds and tranches that we got when we were at the hospital.
Okay. But it's just you, it's not like is the agency bringing other people to come in to support you in
As
this?
far as I know, it's just me and the staff that's downstairs.
And the staff is already short. I mean, where are we with the entire staff of the finance department?
We are in the process of selecting a financial analyst senior position to assist with this. And once that role is filled, we'll technically be at or above full historical staffing in the finance department. But there still may need to be some additional assistance to work through some things.
So there's supposed to be like 9 people there, and now you're down to with
9.
wasn't there 9 people in the,
So we've got a finance director, financial analyst, senior payroll specialist, accounts payable coordinator, accountant, centralized purchasing coordinator, and we have just recently added an additional financial analyst position that is focused on assisting more difficult procurement issues.
so I see a head count of 10, but I thought you
Well, that
didn't
doesn't-
fill that one.
We've got additionally within that department, the 2 HR. HR is a division of finance at this
Okay.
point. So that would add, that's not related to sort of the finances, that's related to HR.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So the question for staff is the bonding requirements for these finance. If we work with someone in an agency, do we know what the bond is? Do we know how our insurance policy deals with someone that comes in?
Yes.
And
Yeah, so we get them bonded through our insurance. If that has not already taken place, it is in process.
It's a process.
And so that's, we go through our insurance with Gallagher to get our finance directors bonded, whether they're temp or interim or permanent.
And that started on Tuesday on Willie's first day.
oh, and is this full-time for you, or how's this gonna?
Full-time.
Thank you.
Questions?
I have a couple.
Yeah, sure.
Where you going to?
Yeah, I'd like to finish if I can.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
they, we're talking about the $800,000 grant again. Do you intend for it to be posted against expenses in 2024, or will it be posted so it shows up in the 2025 total budget as revenue?
That's a good question. And sort of the addition of that has not, obviously it was just announced. So we haven't made that change. Once we receive it, perhaps that, I'm not exactly certain about what the timing needs to be, but whether or not we add this to the budget right now or do it later, we'll have to add it both as revenue and once we are going to expend it,
Yeah.
do it in that way as well. But again, I don't know that the timing is terribly important given the basically it's a wash, it's grant funding. But I believe we would need to include the 200,000 match. So we can sort that out.
Because I keep going back to total budget revenue comparison, and we have more expenses on that for 2025 than we do for revenue, so that's bothering me a bit, and that was all I had to ask at this point.
Well, I did want to at least, and addressing that point, I know that there is concern about any level of deficit spending. I don't, however, want people to catastrophize about this.
Understood.
I would like to urge a little bit of patience and a degree of recognition that, again, our budget reserves are relatively high compared to what we would want them to be, or need them to be in order to maintain, appropriate credit rating and, deal with our potential needs. Should there be some issue that we have to, rely on reserves for some degree of time. In this case, we've got needs now. We have personnel needs. We've got, a long-standing neglect of salaries in this organization that needs to be corrected. And we also have, I think, and we've seen it in department after department, we have a long-standing staffing cuts that we need to rectify if we're going to be able to accomplish the level of service that we want to, that we believe the people of Cleveland Heights deserve. There's no way to provide, the type of service that we expect with inadequate staffing. We can work through our efficiency projects, and we will continue to do that. Process efficiency work isn't, guaranteed or geared toward budget cuts, though. That's not the point. The point is to provide better service in a more efficient way, and sometimes that can lead to budget cuts. Sometimes that can lead to a reduction in the need for staff to participate in a particular function. But given our state right now, what will likely happen is that, if we can reduce the amount of people that are needed to perform task X, that doesn't mean that we need less people. That means that the people who don't need to be doing task X can be doing a neglected task that people are very, very upset that we've lost over the years. One very good example of that is if we were to find more efficient ways for public properties to maintain our medians. When it used to be, there were 10 people working that crew. Now we've got basically 2 permanent people working that crew. There are things that are missing from that service, and we can see them visibly. We can't expect 2 people to do the job of 10 people. It's just not a possibility. And even if we did find efficiency measures, it likely wouldn't result in 2 people being able to do that job that 10 people did. And what we see is that in the rush to get through the 23 acres of median that we have in this city, that we have decided that turf grass is best for some reason, they have to rush through that because when it rains, the grass grows extremely fast. And, in order to rush through that and get to the whole city, you have to cut corners. And so some of those corners are things like ensuring that the edges are trimmed and the debris is collected as opposed to laying there. But if you have to rush through an entire city in such a short amount of time, you're not going to be able to take that kind of care. And it reflects poorly on this city, it reflects poorly on the organization, but what it requires is an increase in capacity. And we're working through with the conversion of public properties from Parks and Recreation into the Department of Public Works. That's how we're looking to increase that capacity there. And so those sorts of things, I understand the concerns and I feel them too. Deficit spending is not a habit. You don't want to make a habit of it. You don't want it to progress beyond, a temporary need. But I will say this, upon the hiring of a permanent finance director, the first order of business, in addition to still clearing up some issues that we're discovering, but the first order of business will have to be creating exactly the kind of forecast that this council would want to see, which is sort of a year-over-year, 5-year forecast where we can start to take a look at a couple different scenarios. What happens if our revenues go up, and how will we deploy those funds? What happens if our revenues go down? How will we digest that? What happens if they stay flat? How will we, address an increase in expenditure need without a corresponding increase in revenues? But I think in this case, we are just now dealing with a relatively large increase in salaries for a massive percentage of our workforce in public safety. And that's something that needs to be addressed, obviously. We've agreed to this contract. So it has to happen. The reserves are there for this reason, so that we can digest that kind of change over time. And make a plan to see us through the next 3 to 5 to 10 years.
Councilman Petrus.
If I could, Councilwoman Larson asked about the grant. The 200,000, is it already in the budget, or do we need to plan to add it in somewhere?
I
Or is
don't
that something?
believe that was put in the budget because of the timing of our actual
Okay.
award.
And one other thing, if I could, on the topic of the deficit, and you and I sort of talked about this every day. I certainly understand that part of the deficit would be offset by the unfilled positions that we have. But there are a lot of other things that aren't included in the budget that I think are important for us to really digest and realize that we're going to have to pay for. The service worker renegotiation, my understanding is that they have not had a meaningful increase in a while. The salary survey that we've been talking about, the pension contribution increases that we may now be required to. Think that
Crossing my fingers.
Yeah.
That we won't, but
And then the unofficial capital expenses in the presentations. And so I think that all of those things, while they haven't been included in the drafted budget, I really think that we should, so that we can get a good understanding. Because I think that while the drafted budget, it has like $1 million deficit, all of these other things, that could really add up. And we don't want to make a deficit a habit. But, I think about the future. I think about, are we likely to have an increase in revenues or decrease in expenses? And I don't think either of those are true. And so wanting to avoid a situation where 2 years or 3 years from now, we have to cut staff out of necessity, if we can try to put ourselves on a trajectory now to avoid that, that's certainly my preference, so that we don't have to cut staff in the future. But
I feel the same way. In response to that, I think I'd like to just provide my perspective. And obviously, if council disagrees, then we can sort of try to sort out where we can find, ground to meet. But so we are going through a couple simultaneous processes. One of them is the hiring of an additional assistant director in Public Works to specifically address capital projects. And once that person is on board, I think that it would make a lot more sense to look at the capital projects and start plotting them out with that expert, as opposed to trying to do that now in this budget. And I say that for a couple different reasons. One of them is because I think that the council will be involved in that conversation, but I think that it should be a separate, independent conversation that doesn't inhibit our conversation about ongoing operations, doesn't inhibit our conversation about next year's budget, because capital projects and planning them out in a systemic way means that we can give ourselves time and say that, this capital project will be, done next year, but then this one and this one, we're gonna do in 26 and 27. And start creating that capital plan that we haven't been able to because we didn't have that position. So that's one reason. The second reason is that I think that we should have a full discussion focused specifically on that plan. So I don't want to suppose what our, actual capital needs might be over and above the 18 or so million that we're expecting to pursue with Leopardo Energy, to correct a lot of the deficiencies in our facilities. And that in and of itself will be a lot of work over the next year too. And so I don't want to overburden the people who will be working on the contracting or the financing or the tracking the progress of these capital projects in public works and public properties. If we're going to be doing a lot of capital work that is not going to appear in the same way and is not going to be an expenditure in the same way, this year was an anomaly in that we had, basically at the start of the year, we had a whole bunch of ARPA projects that we needed to see through from sort of conception, sort of a proposal, all the way to an executable contract. A lot of hiccups along the way, clearly. We're getting to the end of that road. Those projects still need to be completed in the real world and executed. All of that work, we've only got so many people. Our resources are finite. And so all of the people doing the work on ARPA projects, that's also impacting all of the other work, the contracting work, the production of RFPs and RFBs and so on and so forth, in order to move forward on other capital needs and other activities of the city. So this year was an anomaly in that way. Next year, we're hoping that the work with Leopardo will ease some of that burden because Leopardo will be managing a great deal of that on our behalf, and working with us and providing some of their expertise to get those jobs done. But we'll still need to do a lot of work to guarantee that what's happening is what should be happening. And so that will take some of our staff time and capacity as well. And so I don't want to overload the city with, I know we've got a lot of capital needs. We do. We've got, 30 years of accumulated capital needs that maybe we haven't been addressing as much as we should. But I think in this case, we don't want to put too much in this year's budget. And if there are more urgent capital needs that don't require a great deal of intense, labor-intensive, time-intensive management on the part of the administration, things like, we can purchase some cars, those sorts of things. We can include that. That's a little bit less time intensive. A full-blown project, though, a little bit more time intensive. And so those are the things that I'd like for us to wait on. So that's a major reason why there isn't very much capital in this budget, because we've got the Leopardo, we've got to execute on these ARPA processes. And I don't think that we should put too much on a plate if we're not going to be able to eat it.
Right.
So I want to follow up on this a little bit. Councilman, did you
No,
want to
please go
actually
ahead.
address this?
I've got a lot
So-
of things, but please go ahead.
But Leopardo, that 18 million is being financed by savings and not by the general fund, right?
Correct.
Okay. And secondly, and this goes back to the beginning of your conversation with Councilman Petrus, I noticed that our grants for 2025 are like almost nil. But what I'm wondering is, how do we ever know what grants? Okay, so really this is always a retroactive part of the budget, right?
Always.
Okay.
Well,
And I kind of knew that, but
yeah.
you
But
know,
you can't rely on it.
but see, it's funny because when you look at 2024 and 2025 juxtaposed, you know, you would think, you know, I'd have to go back to when we budgeted for that, and it probably was nothing there, but nice stuff happened. Okay, so I got that. Go ahead, Councilman.
There's just so much to unpack here. Okay, so let's start with the contracts and going into a deficit mode for our budget, although there was a deficit this year, which I'd love to talk about, but I think finance director needs to get up to speed before we walk down that path. So we all knew we needed to increase the pay for our police force and our firefighters just to be competitive, be fair, reasonable. We're all on board with that,
Retention.
okay? And no quorums about that, except for the fact, when it was presented to us, I know I asked in both instances, can we afford this? And the answer was yes.
The answer is still yes.
Yes, but we have to go into deficit mode. There's a huge issue where it says we're gonna have to run a deficit budget to afford this.
Yes, correct.
That was not explained to us, that was not given to us, there's no schedules to that.
The revenue for this year, or rather for next year, estimated revenue for next year was not cemented at that time, for one. Now, I'll tell you, to be honest with you, a $97 million budget, you know, and thinking about a deficit of 1 and change million, thereabouts. I suppose we could have overestimated our revenue instead of being a bit more conservative about this, but you know, the idea that we have a perfect crystal ball to even estimate the revenue for next year is it's simply not reality.
I understand that.
Yeah,
Could-
but-
Could I just interject one quick thing?
Please, yes.
When you say budget, you mean the retroactive pay from back to April? That was taken care of.
No, what I'm talking about is this misconception that the increases, first of all, because the increases in police and fire, for one, especially when it comes to fire, because, you know, we went through a process in that negotiation where either we were going to accept, you know, a determination, or we were going to risk, you know, going to another process where the outcome could be even more difficult for us to digest. So, we had very little choice in that matter. And I'm very happy that council, you know, approved both of those contracts. But yeah, I believe that despite this idea of, yes, we're dipping into savings in order to pursue this budget next year, but I don't believe that that means that we cannot afford it simply because our estimate of next year's revenues specifically are less by $1 million from what we anticipate in a more expansive budget to spend, especially considering the fact that we still have vacancies, that we will always have vacancies, that there will always be churn, and there will always be personnel costs that we are budgeting for that we are not paying.
Okay, but the problem here is, you know, how we're defining, I suppose, of what we could afford or not, okay? And it's more than $1 million. You gave us some journal entries that is going to increase the deficit by another 2 million because you're sliding things over. So it's not $1 million, it's even more than that. And you know what? It's gonna even be a lot more than that when we start unpacking all this stuff and we get a real estimate. I mean, I cannot imagine that this $0 in capital for our police force is enough. Absolutely can't imagine that. It's gonna be a lot more than that. And there was cars that someone must have knew about that were gonna be purchased. At least that should have been presented in the budget to us. The issue here is, God, I hate to say it, it's a trust issue for me right now. I mean, we're told we're gonna okay this, but we get, and we do it with blind support sometimes, okay?
Can you clarify what you mean by a trust issue?
I'm getting to that right now.
I mean,
When,
I'll be more pointed. Do you think that anybody in the administration is attempting to deceive you?
I don't know.
You don't know.
That's the
I don't know.
question I would like to know as well.
I don't know.
like how this is going, but I would like clarification on that, because we're not coming from this from a place of good faith. And I've sat here on mute and I've heard this. I heard the conversation that was had before this meeting started, and I can tell you how I have issues. And I can tell you from a transparent standpoint, I know there are members of this council that feel like they need additional pieces of information. But if you go back to our budget hearings and meetings, there are times when information has been repeated to this council on several different occasions. including how they budget for future grants for 2025. So if we're gonna be honest about what's happening here, part of it is, A, we have people on this council that do not understand finance, and B, we have people on this council that do not listen. And so we're spending a lot of time going around in circles and getting questions asked again when they sat in that meeting and they broke down the capital expenses and how they were going to break this down. I have just heard, and I've noted them down, 6 different comments that I know for a fact that our outgoing interim finance director already answered. So as I'm sitting here on this call, you're making it appear as if information hasn't been provided in many cases. Members of this council need to pay more attention when they're speaking, when they're getting this information, because we're going around in a circle. Again, I have 6 things right now that I'm looking at that I know are answered, and we're sitting here as if there's some kind of confusion or some dark cloud. So if we're going to be transparent, let's be honest about this. Where's this lack of trust and understanding? Because I've had to hold off on several things, including the fact that there are members of this council sitting at this table who are questioning the audit, knowing doggone well there are outstanding issues with this council. So I just want to make sure that we're being very transparent with each other and respectful as we're having this conversation. But if there is a trust issue, let's talk about it and put it all out on the table then, because the tone is completely shifted in this conversation as I've been sitting on mute.
Yeah,
Okay, I can talk about the trust issue, okay? We got a bunch of journal entries that should have been included in the budget that weren't, and they came to us as a surprise. Things that should have been things that should be listed as a capital item. And I heard tonight, $1 million deficit. We all know it's $1 million. We all know it's a lot more than $1 million. We need to know what that number is. So when I say I don't trust what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, is that I'm hearing information from the administration that is not true and it's different from what we just heard on the meeting last Monday, which was different than what they heard, because I wasn't at all the budget hearings, during the 3 days of budget hearings. So we need to get a good handle on this. And I want to address the issue of council not understanding finance. Just like the mayor is, we're elected officials. People didn't bring us in because of a finance degree. The
They
way
should have elected each of us because we have.
Councilman, let him finish. Thank you.
Yeah,
That we brought to the
Yeah, let him finish. Thank you. Go ahead.
the issue is there's things that council members are gonna understand and not understand just because of whatever history and experience that they bring to the table. What you need to have, though, in a city is a qualified finance director that walks council through the numbers and the reports, explains what each report is, explains why they're on a capital budget, you're gonna have a starting balance and an ending balance. This is the projected for this year, the expected at the end of the year. There's gonna be some fluidity in this. But you get someone that you trust, that you see, that reports to you often, and you're able to believe those numbers because they walk you through them and they show you what it is. I haven't seen that happen here. I see a financial statement that shows up on a website that doesn't even get presented to council. I have an expectation that we're gonna get an audit from the state, and it's not gonna be complete until next year. For 2023. Why? And another trust issue, I was under the assumption that a headhunter was going to be hired to bring on a finance director and also to replace a Danny Williams. And I recently heard that hasn't happened. I mean, have we brought a headhunter in to do this work yet?
No.
So, and how long has that position been open? I mean, I know that there was a speed bump, but it's been nearly a year. And this is something that just can't happen. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm looking at someone new, and I will want to trust someone when I see him, which I will do. But we have someone new, we don't, an individual, not a team, that's coming in, that's gonna try to give us some comfort level to pass a budget that we know needs additional information. I mean, some of the things I talked about, this, what our existing capital items for 24 is and where we are with those. It's not all ARPA. there's a lot more capital besides ARPA. ARPA can just be totally separate. I mean, this budget that we're coming up has nothing to do with ARPA. I'm talking about all the other items that were approved last year for the capital. And where does that stand and how does that roll over? I mean, that's something that a department should be able to come in here with the list and say, this was on my work plan this year, this is what I got done, this is what I didn't get done. And there's a reason for why it's not getting done. So I guess what I'm saying is when we go back to use the word trust, there's a lot of trouble here with trust. And it also is real troubling that we get this information 45 minutes before a meeting most of the time. Why? Why can't it just be given to us? We still don't have any of the, I mean, I asked because I was gonna be out of town, can you get me the information on the budget? Okay, it was all in handouts and it was piecemeal, much smaller than the prior year. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where I worry about trust. And I don't know where to go from here. I mean, because there's a pretty big divide, I think, among some of this council members and the administration about this. And it kills me because I keep on looking at the police chief here and I see a zero capital. I see a zero capital item there. He needs new cars. We need a lot, and he needs a lot of stuff. And you know, I'm in a position just to try to look at sort of like this fiscal accountability of our job and where we're at, and we don't have the information to do our job.
Okay.
So,
Mr. President, just quickly.
yeah, hold on one second, Councilman.
The trust issue that we have on this council is because there's a lack of understanding. Just because you don't understand something.
That's not true. That is not true, and there's nobody at this table that agrees with that, unless somebody wants to speak up and say
I'm not
that.
looking for-
Is there anybody that agrees with that?
No.
I don't understand this. I really don't.
No.
I don't. What does that mean? And you stated something.
That means you're speaking for yourself and only yourself. That's all it
There's
means.
nothing wrong with that. Don't I always speak for myself?
Well,
I'm telling you, so okay, let's be transparent then. How many people at this table right now have any financial background or any understanding on administration or executive leadership at that table? When you run for office,
this isn't what we're doing
you should be
here.
bringing to the table. There was a level of expectation that I had that I brought my experience to this table to make sure that I had an understanding of this job. You don't just run for office and then use the office to decide you're going to learn how to do your job. So let's be clear about that. There should be a level of competence at that table, not just about city government, but about finance and some type of operational staff operations. So half of the confusion at this table, including about things about the turnaround of staff, is because there's no clear understanding because most of the people at this table have never even managed people, let alone a budget. And so let's just be honest about that.
All right.
And the frustration that this council has about the lack of information coming from the administration, exactly where was our council president and vice president with any type of discussion or plan about expectations or what we wanted from this budget? We didn't even have a clear meeting on our own budget. Also,
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes, we did. You're wrong about that.
Yeah, we
And you
did.
need to not keep saying things that aren't true.
Yeah, we did.
For all of 5 minutes and we moved on.
Not
There
true.
wasn't a conversation about our strategy for 2025, our vision or our goals that are attached or aligned to a budget. That's how you operate and run a city department.
Councilman, the mayor would like to speak.
Have this conversation. And
All right.
so if we're gonna be honest, let's be honest about the fact that there are things on our end that we failed from the beginning.
Yeah.
From the beginning,
Not true.
that have caused some of this.
Not true.
It's not just all trust.
Yeah, I
it's a
just-
lack of understanding.
I just want to make this clear. Thank you, Councilman.
Not true.
I don't agree with one word he said. Mayor, go ahead.
But I think what I'd like to do
Yeah.
is, and this is sort of going back to the concept that we're a team in Cleveland Heights. Now, I understand and I recognize that any individual among us, including me, has the right to have questions, has the right to need information in order to feel comfortable about a decision. And, you know, I don't discount that. I recognize it, I respect it. One thing that I would like to, I guess, request, because I can't insist, but in recognition of certainly our residents' need for us to be Team Cleveland Heights in this respect, I would like to request that at the very least, the administration is provided not necessarily a complete benefit of the doubt, blind acceptance of what we say, but some benefit of the doubt in that we are treated, we are behaving in good faith. Because what I'd like to avoid is starting from a footing where, again, if you're having difficulty accepting certain things, or we haven't given you sufficient information for you to feel comfortable with this, that's fine, and I will continue to work on that. However, there is no way to bridge the decision that the administration is not operating in good faith. Especially because there is no actual evidence that we're trying to do something underhanded. We are absolutely not. In fact, I've been extremely clear, when we do screw up, I've let council know. You know, that is intentional. It is intended to be a way for us to create the trust so that even when we're having some difficulty providing you with some information as a result of some operational issues that we're experiencing, that you don't believe that we are attempting to pull a fast one, that we are attempting to be deceptive, because we absolutely are not. Now, I suppose I can't speak for every individual person who has worked or works for this administration with a 100% certainty that somebody wasn't being underhanded at some point in this process. I cannot provide that with 100% certainty, but I don't start from a default that the administrative staff who worked on this were doing this without good faith. So that's the request that I'd like to make, because I think that we can probably work on this as a team and get this job accomplished for the people of Cleveland Heights more effectively if we're not concerned that you think that we're being deceptive, because we're not.
So there's,
Oh, go ahead.
okay, so one of my,
I do want to say something.
So, you know, I've worked with a lot of lawyers in my days, and one of the first things I learned was the smell test. And it was just like, if nothing's add up, stuff just starts smelling bad, okay? There has to be more transparency, okay? And there is trust issues. I mean, the fact that the interim finance director had put a resignation in without anybody knowing it is kind of a big issue, okay? I had a one-on-one meeting with you, which I adore. I enjoy those meetings. I think we get a lot done with them. At that meeting, I actually suggested, I really think you may want to consider making Tara the finance director. And you told me no.
Can you not talk about this?
Well, what I'm going to say is at that point is like, oh, we have a resignation. She's not going to be here. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that I think we should have known, or at least the people who were at the budget hearings should have known at that time. So that's information that I think is kind of critical to things. And again, you know, getting everything dribbled to you 45 minutes before the meeting when you know it started in June, it just is a bad sign. And yeah, so, you know, maybe that's a gripe. But I mean, I think if you return back to sort of like I hope the constructive list of not things that I need to have, I think any financial person would need to have. I mean, the things that are necessary in a budget to look at that were included last year, that were stripped away in this year, such as the before and after estimates and the fund balances, which is one of the most critical things that you could have. I mean, why were those taken out?
So I understand what you're saying, Councilman. Could I just
Before you do it, very, very briefly, I would like to express to you that I was not aware at the time of our meeting of that resignation.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's fair enough. So I appreciate what you said, Mayor. I mean, I don't think that underhanded is a little bit stronger than I think anybody's trying to say. I think that with our staffing issues, with the fact that we got stuff kind of at the last minute, with the fact that, you know, questions have been submitted, but maybe they didn't get to in a timely manner. There is maybe a little bit of anxiety in this particular budget, and there's a whole bunch of circumstances, including the one sitting behind me, that make this difficult.
Of course.
But the Team Cleveland Heights thing, of course. And I think we all know, everybody, if we're gonna be honest, 98% of the time, we're really working together quite well. So this is not about some gratuitous recalcitrant thing going on. There are legitimate issues with the sequence of things that have happened all year. No finance director for a year, the interim finance director resigning. We almost had a finance director, but then we didn't. The fact that we don't have a financial audit, we don't have a capital budget. We do know about expenses that are going to come our way from Archer and from this union negotiation. I mean, we're here.
Pension fund.
The pension fund. We're here to scrutinize the budget, to make sure we're that extra set of eyes on this. I regret if the tone went a little bit too far. I mean, everybody's got their own way of expressing themselves, and and I would say that, sometimes the people that complain the most about that have the same amount of trouble, if not more than anybody else, about the tone in which they express themselves. But I do think we should stick to, let's just work through this, get as far as we can today. We don't have much time. Rather than characterize things about, something doesn't look right, let's just talk about it. And I think when we start characterizing things, then it gets into an area where people get offended. Go ahead.
I appreciate that. I know you called on Jim. I didn't see that just now, but I just wanted to express that was my concern. If we can keep things transparent and collaborative, I'm fine with that. But the accusatory tones where I drew the line. I can't have that considering my experience with this council.
Well, you do it a lot, so anyway, go ahead.
The fact that I'm having issues and you all are having illegal meetings, in transparency and honesty, I don't want to hear that coming from the administration, so we clean our own house.
Go ahead.
Go ahead and move on.
Being able to ask some questions about traffic calming, that was very helpful for me. And so that removed a couple of the questions from my list. I think that so that we can be as productive as possible, if we could focus on the questions, Councilman Posh, a lot of the questions that he sent along, I also had questions about. I think it would be great if we could continue going through that. And just one thing to add that has sort of been touched on a few times, these additional likely expenses in terms of service worker renegotiation and other things. I understand on the topic of the capital expenses that we don't want to take on more than what we have the capacity for. That obviously makes sense, but there are certain things that we know that we're going to do. Like you mentioned, the police cars, we had a bit of discussion about that. I think for me, it would be important and helpful if we could include those things in the budget and at least estimates for some of these things that we anticipate that we're going to have. So between including estimates for those things in the budget, getting questions answered from Councilman Posh, that would make me happy.
Mr. President, I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Petrus, with Councilman Petrus. I think, part of the goal of the budget hearings, from my perspective, was to provide council and the administration a chance to work together on exactly those questions. That's why the conversation was had about the police cars in a council budget hearing. If we could have that conversation, we could take council's temperature on how you felt about the addition of those things, and how we might move forward without sort of just saying, here's the capital that we're gonna do, take it or leave it. I wanted you to have a conversation with the chief, with the directors about those sorts of things so that together we could work through, prioritize, think about what things we can easily do, relatively easily do, and versus the things that maybe we can have a larger conversation about later. That was the intent, that was the purpose. It was also with an eye toward mitigating the difficulty of the actual capacity issues that we have that we've had in the finance department. We knew that this year was going to be different than last year. When Andy Unetic retired, we knew that this year was going to be different than last year, by necessity. Certainly didn't expect the path that we ended up on this year. And I'll say it probably repeatedly. I do believe, looking at data from other cities and that in part our salary threshold for that particular position causes us a problem. It's potentially something that we could just handle, as a one-off. The intention was to use a complete, wage study so that we could look at all of this holistically and make some decisions. And of course, that wage study took longer than we anticipated.
Is it completed? I know you keep mentioning it, but we haven't seen it. Is it completed?
Correct. It's yes-ish, I would say. I think that, I've been told that there is an additional piece that Archer would like to provide that I have not seen yet. However, the difficulty here, and again, the resignation of the interim finance director was not something that I was anticipating, clearly, certainly not in the middle of our budget process. But we certainly in municipal government generally, we deal with the reality of the situation. This is our environment now, so we have to deal with where we are now. And so what we've been doing is attempting to address those issues. It is not going to be easy. Certainly not easy for the administration to deal with this. We're working through it. And again, the questions that Mr. Paj, that Councilman Paj, that Vice President Russell had, that you had, and all of the questions, really. Putting those together, if you had sent those questions, who would you imagine would be answering them? It would be the interim finance director, right? Who is now gone. And so that's sort of the difficulty that we're attempting to address. There are systems that she had access to that I don't, because she's the finance director. Right? So we have to work through all of that operational issue before we can even get to being able to pull down some of that data for you. So that's something that I just wanted to express so that you know that we are working very hard to address your concerns, and we're going to keep working until we do.
I have one question.
Yeah, please.
Is there a detailed allocation of recreation fees for concession stands and the alcohol beverage sales?
So,
Because I know we deal with that as far as cash. So is there any detailed in the budget regarding that? The concession stand take-in, or, because now we sell alcohol, correct?
in terms of like
The K
looking at our
part?
revenues,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I'm new.
I know, no, I'm not looking at you. I understand.
Right.
No, I understand.
I don't know that I'll be able to find and pull that up and provide that to you right now in this.
I'll just send an email just as a reminder.
Okay,
That's okay.
sure.
So I mean, the only list I have is to go through this. I'd love to be able to respond to what the mayor said about having a complete staff or not complete staff. I mean, I think as a council person, it's kind of a black box. Yeah, I'm sympathetic that, yeah, you're going through some speed bumps right now. But in order for us to do our job, there's certain things that we need to have, okay? And the current job at hand is to get this budget resolved and get us the information that we would need to look at to move forward. there's a number of items on my list that are regarding to the capital budget. And I don't wanna repeat them, any more of them. Are you prepared to talk about any of those tonight?
So what I'd like to do, if we're going to talk about certain things, capital expenditures that we could do next year, I don't have a problem having that discussion with council. I think, we could maybe come to some determinations as well about what things the council believes should or shouldn't be included. Again, my caution is just that I don't want to overload our capacity to actually perform the work and put it in the budget with no expectation that it's actually going to be done. But the other piece is, sort of having a longer conversation about capital plan, I think is something that in all likelihood through the Municipal Services Committee we'll be having next year, once we've got a more full complement in the Director's Office in Public Works. But what I don't want to do, especially considering the shape of the finance department and the state that the administration's in related to that, what I don't want to do is make some plans for capital in this budget without the capacity either, on the administrative side or on the council side to, again, go back to really trust that, what we're saying is going to be the reality, even if you take out intention. And so what I'd like to do is have a more full and reliable plan for the type of capital expenditure before we make these decisions. I know that we can think about, the 5 cars that we hope to purchase this year, and, thereby reducing the amount of capital expenditure that the chief would like next year. Potentially, I think that's a relatively simple thing to discuss. Council can decide whether it's okay with the 5 car purchase this year and adding 5 cars next year. But when it comes to making a real capital plan, we haven't done that in a while. We need to. And I don't think that we should budget for a great deal of capital expense on top of, some of the work that we know we're going to be doing that's going to be funded in a different way, whether it's through ARPA or through Leopardo, and have a more full conversation about a long-term capital plan before we start doing this. I don't think that we should put a bunch of capital in this.
Okay, so, but that there's some things that we need to get.
Absolutely.
Okay, we don't
Well,
We don't know what those things are.
We've had that discussion through the budget hearings in part with some of these departments.
So then we can't prioritize those because we're not in the seat doing the job, okay? I mean, it's from the police chief down, the police chief up to you. I mean, you guys need to prioritize things and tell us what they are.
That's why we're having this conversation.
Okay, well,
But it's not just our priorities that matter either. Council's priorities matter as well.
well, they do, and they can be wicked into all this, and they should be wicked into all this. But the issue here is the things that we have been presented with, we need some priorities and why they're important, okay? Now, I would tell you, if it was a perfect world, we'd be getting regular reports. We'd understand where some of the limits were. We'd understand that, oh, we've got X number of cars that we're out. We've got this trouble, we've got this trouble. We would love to be able to spend money on this. I mean, that's the kind of interaction that this council needs to be having with the administration.
Mhm.
I've been on this council for I don't know how long, maybe a couple months. None of that takes place here. I mean, we have
It's taken place this year as a result of some extenuating circumstances. Again, as I said, we knew that when Andy Unetic retired, there were going to be some things that would be immediately different. I think Andy Unetic was an extremely responsive finance director. That was the goal. That was the administration's goal, providing that information on a regular basis to council. However, this year was an anomaly in quite a few ways. Not the least of which is the amount of work that had to go into the ARPA conversation and the finance work and the legal work that went into that took a great deal of time away from an already overburdened staff. And so my point is, this is an anomaly. I understand that we need to address the concerns that the anomaly presents. But I want you to know that we can be a team in addressing that. And it doesn't have to be, even though you're scrutinizing something that we're bringing to you, the reason why there is no capital or very, very little capital in this budget is A, because we knew that we need to digest some personnel costs, for one. So we don't want to add a whole bunch of additional capital to this budget, especially on the heels of a great amount of other capital projects that we're doing. So this is the reason why, I mean, there was an intentional, to a certain degree, to include council in the discussion about capital, and it's being cast in this way that is maybe not in line with the intention. So I just want to let you know that.
But you gave us a bunch of journal entries that totally contradict that.
As a result of the conversation, in part, that departments had with council during those budget hearings. So
That's correct. And just to be clear, and that's what I was stating earlier, my frustration is lying in the fact that they started out these conversations during the budget hearing, letting us know that the capital improvement projects will be separated out this way so that we can have this discussion. And every day we went through this and we had this. And then we had our next committee of the whole hearing, and it was asked again, and this was stated again, that they wanted to have a collaborative conversation with council about these expenses. We're sitting here like this isn't something that hasn't been said on multiple occasions. And I just need the public to know at this point, this isn't something that the administration has not said. They said this during the entire budget hearing, at the beginning of every presentation, and this came up during committee of the whole on multiple occasions, that they wanted to have this collaborative conversation with council, and that there absolutely were capital improvement needs, which they broke down by department, but they wanted to make sure that it was concretized and that they had this conversation with council first. I don't understand why we're going around in circles, but at this point, I need the public to know that there's no confusion at this point.
There is confusion. We don't know what our deficits are.
Okay, hold on. First of all, characterizing the department heads coming before council and us, we're hearing an extemporaneous, it's completely extemporaneous. Because we're hearing stuff for the first time in real time. We're not getting anything ahead of time. So I don't think the way people react to that should be persecuted in any way by anybody. I know you haven't done that, Mayor, but I'm just saying right now, that's what I'm hearing from Councilman Maddox. I think it's just absolutely out of bounds to say, that when you react for something that you're literally reading, you're not even reading it, because if you're reading, then you're not listening to the directors. We're just trying to take this stuff in. I completely understand, we had a capital budget last year. We don't have one this year. We had the budget book ahead of time last year. We didn't get anything ahead of time this year. Every reaction to me, as long as it's civil, is understandable. Go ahead, Councilman.
You mentioned the long-term capital plan, and I think that that's a great idea. I think that we're really going to benefit from that, and I look forward to that process. But the reality is that we are going to have some capital expenses this year that I think that we ought to include in the budget in advance of that conversation about the long-term capital spending. And I know that the administration included, it was like 4.4 million or something like that of capital expenses in here, but for a lot of these departments, like police, for example, as Councilman Posh noted, it says 0, but then just below it says 2025 capital request, not in 2025 budget. So I think that there are at least 3 departments where there are 0 capital requests. So knowing that we have capital dollars being spent from ARPA, from Leopardo work, and the 4.4 that's already in here, are you okay with these departments, with these capital expenses not being purchased this coming year?
So how I feel about it is, I do rely a great deal on the directors and the chiefs to provide me with what are the most urgent needs, what can be put off. But even despite that, I think that there is still room for us to put together a more long-term plan. So, for instance, when it comes to the police vehicles, for instance, having a once we get to a point where we, have vehicles that are all relatively updated, that we don't have police officers riding around in cars that are not really sufficient to the need. We can start to put together a staged plan for, replacement over time. Now, obviously, we've been playing catch up because of, sort of deferring that kind of investment for quite a while. We've been playing catch up. But I know that we need to be cautious. So that's something that I'm attempting to be here, and that's why I wanted to have council engaged in the discussion, because I don't believe that it's just me who gets to make the determination about priorities, right? I want council to be engaged in this discussion as well. The directors were available to talk about what the capital needs, might be from their perspective. This is not how that happens in probably most municipal governments. Most municipal governments, and we've seen examples of this in relatively recent history, most municipal governments, the administration, they're talking about a black box, the administration goes into a room, sorts out what is and what is not a priority for the next year, for the year after, and then they say, council, this is what we got. The things that may have been excised from that list, council may never hear about. And that was something that I was attempting to avoid, especially in this circumstance where the year 2024 has been incredibly unusual. So it was an intentional effort to bring council into that priority setting discussion. Now, I'd like to have the conversations with, say, for instance, the chief here about sort of how he would rank the needs, the capital needs that the division has, and hear what council thinks about it, has to say about it. So I'd like to have that conversation, and continuing that conversation, not just through this budget hearing, but not just through this year, but in an ongoing way. As we're talking about, okay, well, capital need that might crop up next year is, what if 3 police cars that we just purchased get totaled? And, we need to purchase more, and, maybe insurance doesn't cover the entire, issue, or for some, whatever reason. Those sorts of issues that will come up, we'll have ongoing conversation, of course. But when it comes to this planned capital expenditure, I think you're right. We can take a look and have the conversation with the departments in order to, all 8 of us, have the conversation about what our 2025 capital priorities need to be.
Yep, and I certainly understand that things could come up, 3 accidents or whatever it might be, but I think that we can and we should look at these lists of what I'm calling unofficial capital requests. In the case of the police, it says 2025 capital request, not in 2025 budget, and reach a consensus on which of these things we want to include in capital. I think that this is separate from that long-term conversation, and I think that we can and should do this now as a part of this budget process rather than waiting into 2025. So I think that it would be helpful, and I'm going to suggest as something specific that we do, we go through each of these departments, identify which of these things we want to include, if any. Maybe it's the case that there are some where we don't want to, so that we can get to a better point of understanding what the holistic budget would look like. Because I think what I'm hearing, and this is true for me too, a lot of the concern is about not knowing where we might end up without estimates for things like the capital expenses, the service worker negotiation. So to address the questions around the capital expenses, I think we should go through each of these departments, look at the list, decide which of these things we want to include. And then I also, in addition to doing this, think that it would be helpful to continue to go through Councilman Posh's questions. I know for the first one, for example, we heard that we would get an answer on Monday. We can continue to go through them just so that there was an expectation set that we would hear answers today. And I understand that there are capacity constraints. Willie is new and is going to be needed to pull some of this information. So it's going to take some time, but just so that we're on the same page with what to realistically expect here, because I think some people might say, okay, we heard that we were going to get answers to this today. We don't have them. just learning updates, if we can't get answers to them, I think will be helpful.
Thank you, Councilman. I mean, this is, you brought up a continuing resolution as an analogy, I think, the last meeting, and this, what we don't want is this to become a kind of administrative continuing resolution. I think, I guess I am characterizing this, but it seems like, if we don't do this, we're kind of doing that.
Well, so when it comes to capital expenditures, like we've got our operations. We know that the bulk of operations costs is salaries.
75%.
We are also, again, $18 million of facilities repairs is nothing to sneeze at.
Right.
It's a big deal for us. And I think, I recognize that doing it this way and sort of separating out sort of major capital expenditures from our operations is maybe unusual. I guess it's not unusual at the state level, but it's unusual for a municipality, I suppose. But in this case, I think given the circumstances, this was the best way to achieve ongoing operational certainty, because any capital expenditure that we would be budgeting for in a separate, larger scale capital expenditure conversation would go through council. And we would have this understanding of how our operations are going. We would have an understanding of potentially how the Leopardo work is going, how the ARPA projects are moving forward. And in that context of greater understanding among all 8 of us, we'll be able to make those determinations together about whether or not a particular capital expenditure is appropriate for 2025 as opposed to 2027.
So how do we, do you agree that, with Councilman Petrus, that we could kind of go?
I think that's an absolutely useful
Okay.
exercise. I think that, maybe starting now with, I don't want to put the Director Gonzalez on the spot necessarily, when it comes to aiding in this discussion about priority setting without sort of, if you wanted to have more staff support to help with that, or if you feel comfortable, I don't want to.
prepared, yeah.
Okay. And the chief here, and that could address a bulk of that discussion.
We want to start.
But yes, absolutely, and that was the intent, is to involve council in that discussion.
So, police is a lot shorter than Parks and Rec. Do we want to start there?
It's fine with me.
Did you want to come to the?
Yeah, absolutely.
President Cook,
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the reasons we're supposed to be here tonight is to discuss the piece of legislation that has the adjustment on it. And I do have a question about the police cars, so if I could ask that first before we go into 2025.
Yeah, no, that's fine. This all depends on, how far we can get with the
Yeah.
big budget, but yeah.
We bought 8 cars last year, correct?
Correct.
The hybrids. And during this discussion during the 2024 budget process, we were advised the intention was to phase in the replacements needed over the next few years, which makes sense. A long-term
Correct.
plan. The request is for 10 this year, or for 2025, which is on your requested list for the budget. And we're talking about purchasing 5 of them right now so that we can get some kind of a deal that's offered. We have this entry in front of us where rather than 300 and from the cash supplement report we got at the beginning on Monday this week, where it says $319,200 needs to be spent on those vehicles. When you look at the adjustment itself, only $44,209 is going into police admin for capital. So does that mean maybe there was some leftover, that you have some reserve in your capital for 2024?
That's a good question. I guess I would have to consult with finance.
It's my understanding that they were asking for 10 police cars. 5 was approved.
Right.
And
Well, we talked about it.
the amount of money that we need to transfer from salaries, because we have about a $1.4 million surplus in salaries for the police department. And so we want I was asked to see if we can transfer $319,000 to capital to purchase those 5 police cars.
So we're not hiring?
But I think, do we need two council approvals to move and impact those 2 accounts, reduce the salary and increase the capital?
I'm just trying to understand this entry that we got that's called the budget adjustment, because it's different from the cash supplement report, so if you could help me with that.
How much was it?
Well, on the budget adjustment itself, $44,209 were added into account 7201 police admin capital. And the cash supplement report said we were gonna need 319,000, so.
That might be 2 different things.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out.
The 319 is the 5 cars and it's made up of 2 components. It's about 48,000 per car, and then it's another $81,000 to retrofit for our needs, police cars.
Well, my understanding is, going back to what you said about the salaries, that would just go back into the general fund. We don't actually have to do anything if we don't spend money on salaries, right? That money just goes back into the general fund. Like if we're supposed to, if we budget for 100 police officers and we only have 93, then, I don't know what the actual numbers are.
I just
So
wanna,
I don't think we need to do anything with that, but we would obviously for the purchase. Go ahead,
I just
finish.
need to know what we're voting on Monday. Because 1202, there's an entry or a document called backup to budget adjustment ordinance, and then there's the actual budget adjustment. So what's gonna be posted when finance sits down to post this entry, which one of these documents is gonna be put into the financial system?
In the budget adjustment documentation that was provided in the agenda packet
This one,
for
December. Yes.
number 2, we're looking at that increase in Fund 402 of $319,209. So basically that's just an increase in Fund 402 in order to purchase those 5 new police cars and outfit them. There are additional changes in police admin specifically for Fund 402. But that's not necessarily related. The locker room is being removed because we're not gonna be able to get that done this year.
Okay, I'm trying to understand what I'm expected to vote on Monday. Is it the first document that we got where there was 319,000 for the fiscal, or is it gonna be the budget adjustment itself?
So that's just backup.
Can I just simplify this?
Yeah.
I think, okay, so we don't know what was unspent. I just heard that we have plenty of unspent salary this year that can cover maybe all or part of the purchase of these cars. I would like to not worry about this budget piece. If the goal is to get these cars purchased, let's take some of that money and spend it on these cars. It seems like it's a good need.
Yeah.
Let's just do that right now.
Well, this
We
is,
agree.
this is
And-
the
and-
thing. I
and-
think with that in mind, that's basically what, we're if we're not going to be spending the salaries, then they will stay in our bank accounts. They will not be provided as paychecks, right? And so, I'm sorry?
Spend it on the cars.
It's just do.
My point is, in order to spend that on the cars, we don't necessarily need to say, okay, here are salaries, we're going to reduce salary budget. Because it's really just an accounting piece after that. And so we don't necessarily, we can do that in a budget wrap up if we need to, I suppose. And move money from certain accounts to other accounts in order to wrap that up, and that's the goal for the rest of the year. But I'm saying, my point is, for this, what we would need to do is increase funding in Fund 402 in order to account for these 5 cars.
Part of the issue is, and again, it's in the ask that multiple of us have given you, is like where we are this year with estimates, what have we not spent, okay? because we don't know. We just don't know. So part of the issue is the unknown, and the concern that we have. I don't know who I'm speaking for when I say this. We just don't know. And that's what, I mean, we're pleading to try to get this information, which is why we all documented all this. And I know you, Jim, you've got your hand up, but I just think throw this journal entry away. Let's get these cars purchased based on that. Let's do the truck that is gonna get paid for by the sewer district.
Oh, yeah.
And just give us simple journal entries. Let's not complicate this transaction with these other issues that are gonna impact the budget. Can we just all agree and just do that?
So can the law department just take that apart?
Law department can assist, but I think we'll need to work with Mr. Phelps in order to make sure that we're doing it the appropriate way.
Agreed.
So we'll the three of us will get together with the chief, with anybody, and with Director Klingscale, in order to make sure that we are sort of separate, and perhaps we do it as completely separate budget adjustments so that council can have independent conversations. Now, if you take a look at last year, there were a couple different major budget ordinances that we dealt with. One of them is the budget for the year upcoming. The second is the budget wrap-up for the year that we are currently in. Generally, over the course of a year, you've budgeted for certain things.
Yeah.
You know, if a project came in under budget, well, you didn't spend all your budget. But then if there's another budget that needed additional funding, then you would make transfers in order to keep all budgets whole. That's the work that we do at the end of the year. Obviously, this year is more complicated. As a result of some operational difficulties, we're going to be working through that and attempting to achieve the same goal that we did last year, which is, you know, wrapping up our budget the right way so that council can see exactly where we end up at the end of the year and January 1. That's the goal, and that sort of thing is intended to be done in December. Obviously, again, this year has been more complicated. You know, speed bumps, as you call them, right? You know, and so I guess I don't really have more to say on that topic, but that's the point, and we want you to have a better understanding of where we will end up this year. But I'll tell you, we can't spend more than we have.
When you go into deficit funding of things, you're spending more than what you have.
No, incorrect. When you're going into deficit spending, in this case, we're not the federal government. We're not borrowing in order to spend. What we're doing is taking from reserve in order to achieve operational goals. That's what we're doing. And that is different. Well, if you are looking strictly at, let's say, you know, revenue in versus expenditure out, yes, estimated revenue in, the amount of revenue that we expect to take in next year. We were in deficit spending, for instance, this year in a certain respect because we weren't getting any more ARPA allocations. Not because we didn't have the money. There's a difference between deficit spending at the federal level versus deficit spending here at the municipal level.
You know, I agree with that, but the one thing is we also estimate what our reserves are. And that's, I think that's the thing that makes this uneasy. You know, I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because that's not scientific either, not at this point. I mean, there will be a point, I would assume sometime in the first quarter next year, where we'll know what our reserves are at the end of this year.
Yeah.
But, you know, so I do understand why Councilman Posh is saying this is deficit spending, because if it goes below where we need to be with our reserves, that is a problem, and we don't know the answer to that, you know? I mean, you can't know, and we don't know, we don't know at all, and you can't know that now.
Not with absolute certainty.
Right. So, go ahead.
So during the budget hearings, we talked about splitting the request, buying 5 of them this year using unspent money from unfilled positions.
Yeah.
So that was sort of, a decision that I made without like really knowing whether we could. I knew that there were unfilled positions, but I had no idea how much money that was. So hearing from Willie that it's about 1.4 million,
Correct.
that's very helpful. So I guess a question for the group. We previously talked about having half of that bought in 24, half of it bought in 25. Looks like this is just under 700,000. If it's 1.4 million that we're avoiding in costs, do we just want to buy all of them in 24? Do we still want to do half in 24, 25? I just want to make sure that there's like consensus on that understanding.
Councilman, if I may, and the mayor, just to provide a little more context, how it kind of came together. So when we met with the mayor to talk about our request for the year, and again, like the mayor indicated earlier, we're doing some catch up on things to get our fleet up, as you heard in the meeting, up to, to meet the city's goals and objectives. So as in the meeting, we heard Councilman Maddox, about these cruisers in particular. We only order the hybrids. And as I'm sure you're all aware, it's very difficult. Like those 8 cars you approved for us last year, do you know they're still not in service as we're sitting here? They're now just getting put together. So what had happened, Councilman Posh, for your reference, so during the course of us preparing our capital request, so we were just going to ask for, I think we were going to ask for 15, but then we agreed, well, let's just, being sensitive to the needs, everything going on, let's just do 10. Well, in that short term, we got an email about the fingerprint machine I talked about. Unexpected, obviously, it's a pretty important need we need for the department. And Lieutenant Corrigan and he's very persistent and relentless, and he learned that the dealership had 5 of those hybrid cars ready to go that we could grab right now. So instead of waiting to go through the process, waiting another year to get those, it was like just hey, let's try to present this. The mayor agreed and like mentioned that this is something that we could do now. So that's kind of so to decrease our ask for next year, to use those funds for this year, so that way then next year we could just get the 5 cruisers and the money for the fingerprint machine. So that's kind of how that came to play.
So back to
Is the 1.4 million for just the police salaries?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm very much in favor of that, but I also want to make sure that the budget has the other 5 cars in it and the fingerprint software in the budget, because right now it says 0.
That would be fine. I would welcome an amendment to the budget to include those.
But that would come out of this 1.4 million.
No,
Um,
not
Not
exactly,
directly.
not the way.
Not directly.
No, I understand.
5 would.
5 would. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, you were the one that suggested this.
Well, we talked about that at the budget hearing. And what happened
But we didn't know
last year
this.
was when we had requested changes, we got a revised budget was prepared by someone that was presented to us before we voted on the final budget. We also had a pretty good idea of where we were going to be ending the year. And we were also given an idea of where there were big differences between this year's budget and what was proposed for next year. There was some explanation. And like Councilmember Posh said, last year, none of us are, I'll just speak for myself, I'm not a financial expert, but Director Unetic held our hands and ran us through the process and made it very easy to understand what was going on. And that did not happen this year, and that is why we find ourselves where we are right now. To hear for the first time tonight that there was 1.4 million in surplus just from the police department.
First time.
From somebody
First
who's
time,
been
and,
for 2
and,
days.
and that was something that I recall I asked for before, to know what were the savings this year in the budget because of unfilled positions for the entire city. It is very difficult to, in my mind, know what a prudent and proper budget is for next year without knowing what we spent this year, where we had savings, and can we expect those savings for next year?
So, in part, I did at least want to bring up, I know that the third quarter financials don't tell the story of right now. But they give an indication. And I also, I don't like to ask people to do the impossible. I don't always know what is truly impossible versus what is just extremely difficult or just very improbable to be able to get done. But like I said, in the context that we're in, taking a look at sort of where we were September 30, gives an indication of sort of, where we will end up to some degree or another. I think the goal, you're absolutely right, sort of having an understanding of, the fact that we are, because of churn, we still haven't gotten to our budgeted number of officers. We've hired, but that doesn't mean that, the ratio of entry to exit, is sufficient to get to full staffing. And that's something that we've been consistently letting council know. That's not a secret. That hasn't been a secret. We haven't gotten to full budgeted staff in policing. We've said that for years now, including this year. In terms of the exact number, there's a certain point at which we could tell you, and then it would change when, retros go back to April 1. But still, despite that, we know that we are not at full staff. And there are still unencumbered balance in general fund, to a relatively high level. In this case, I understand sort of the concept of thinking about that, transferring from the salary line into Fund 402 in order to purchase these police cars. I understand it. Conceptually, that makes a lot of sense. And that's fine. It's slightly more complicated than simply increasing Fund 402 by $319,000 and purchasing the 5 cars and upfitting them. We could go through the extra step of reducing the 2024 police officer salary budget, but I don't know that that's necessary from a functional standpoint. And I don't know, maybe Mr. Phelps, if I don't know if there's more, like from an accounting perspective.
From an accounting perspective, you're impacting two different statements. When you take money out of the salary, you're reducing your expenses, thus increasing your net income.
Mhm.
Okay, your bottom line. And when you move it over to that 319 to capital, that's on the balance sheet, so that's part of your assets.
Yeah.
So
And
it's a different.
And it's possible to do it, it's just not, I don't know that it's necessary to when we have sufficient cash to purchase the vehicles. So, but it's fine, however council wants to do that is fine.
Because everything automatically, at the end of the year, everything that's left over automatically goes back into the general fund anyway.
Well-
I mean, is that, that's a question. I didn't
Not
mean to say-
exactly, it's not exactly that. What happens at the end of the year and the beginning of next year, fingers crossed, is that next year we will be operating under the 2025 budget. And so
Yeah,
the
I understand the
2024
distinction.
budget disappears.
You're right.
This is nuance. This is a black box. For me, I don't care what funds it comes out of. I just want to know that we're able to afford it based on those salaries. So from my perspective, there's so much more that we need to go over tonight. Just handle it any way that you guys feel like I would think the finance director would need to make that choice. Whatever way you think is the best way to do it is fine. But I know that we've got the money to pay for those cars today, okay? It's the first time we heard that we had. Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff that we absolutely need to know.
And this is, honestly, this is the first opportunity that we've really had to even have a conversation with Mr. Phelps in this setting. And so I appreciate you being here, by the way.
Absolutely.
And sort of, you know, expanding on that conversation that we were intending to have with the directors and chiefs in a more in-depth way about these requests.
So,
What other departments have
Well, let me-
extra funds that was not spent?
well,
Back
that
to
was-
COP.
that's something we'd like to know.
Back to COP.
See,
Something we've asked
this
for.
report is really only as of September 30th, but it will show you where unencumbered balances are in each area.
Yeah.
It's a
Is,
good
is the
one.
1.4 in there?
That's a
It's-
detail,
it's-
but embedded in,
it's-
but I would like to just
You
use
need to update.
unencumbered funds if we could, please. That would be the most straightforward way to go, correct? Agree?
I would think so, but I.
If the money's going to go back in.
Yeah, it's just.
That's what
it's
we've
just-
done often when we have something that's not budgeted.
And we know that it'll be offset by those savings in the salaries, but if I could, so firstly, should we invite Mr. Phelps to the table? We have a seat here, so, but then, so I guess back to my earlier question, we were talking
Sorry.
about during the budget hearings, 5 and
Yes.
24,
I know.
5 and
So just,
25, is that still the consensus? Is that what we wanna do, plus
Put it on some of his-
the fingerprint
Yes,
reader?
I think so, yes.
So that was our desire.
And let's change the budget to deal with that.
Yes, update the number to reflect that, so.
Could we just briefly, very briefly, talk about what we wanna do? I have some questions for Mr. Gonzalez, and I have a couple other questions that were like we're almost 2 hours into this that are,
Did you email your question?
I got a couple questions that I wanna ask from about an hour, but my questions are based on some things that were said about an hour ago. But so what do we wanna accomplish before we leave here?
I think
We wanna,
complete.
we wanna finish this up, right? And again, we definitely wanna talk to Mr. Gonzalez, he's here, Director Gonzalez, because he's here. I would like to take the temperature of everybody and ask the law director specifically how to do that, so we know where we're at and what we're willing to do after this. But what else do people want to accomplish?
I mean, I think that we just sort of settled one of the things that I was hoping to do. I suggested that we start
Because that's
going through
legislation.
the capital
Yeah.
department by department, and we just went through the requested unofficial capital expenses for police. So I think that we're now done for police, right?
Right.
Is that other folks' understanding? And now we could discuss Parks and Rec?
We could do Parks and Rec,
Is-
and then we need to figure out what we still need to do and when we're gonna do it.
So that,
Go ahead, no, please.
so that is the capital, part of the capital budget that the chief wants. I also heard that the mayor asked what was it that council wanted in each of those capital budgets as well.
Yeah, how
Well,
are we
that
going to
was-
factor that
I
in?
wanted to have an inclusive conversation about what our collective priorities are.
So I guess how are we going to individually share our priorities? So for example, one thing that I've talked about is increasing pedestrian and cyclist safety. Having Director Clinkscale here, I was able to, have some of that answered, but I'm sure other folks have other priorities. So what will be the process for folding those in?
We sent the mayor this, this is from Addie collected.
Okay.
It's not, I don't see anything from you on here,
Okay.
but the mayor did get this at some point. And then, if there's more,
Okay.
yeah, share them. I mean,
Are those built into any of this?
This is what I was stating. We sent that list over, but we never had a comprehensive discussion about a 2025 vision or plan or budget or what we were looking for as a council. That's what I was stating earlier. We need to have a meeting with us. We don't discuss our vision, project, plans, roles, or any of that, and that's what's bringing that confusion. That's something that we should have organized to bring to the table. So when I say that we did not have a budget discussion, it's precisely what I mean. We just sent over a list, and we didn't even have a discussion about what was on that list, and that was it. There needs to be a comprehensive discussion about the vision and the plans this council has in terms of its leadership in the city, and that we have not had.
But in all fairness, we agreed to do it that way because the mayor last year, the mayor came to us and asked us, what do you guys want? This year, the mayor said, No, you guys, if you guys wanna send me something, you'll send me, so basically we just follow directions. Now, if, I mean, if you think that's missing, I suppose we could do that. Go ahead.
Okay, the conversation about the priorities of city council cannot be held in a vacuum. That is a conversation that requires the administration to be a participant of that,
course.
because the administration knows best what their plans are, what their goals are, and what we can afford and what we can't afford. Also, to the extent that we have goals and ideas on there that are already in the works. The one, observation I'll just make is, where's the 4 or 5 year plan?
Right.
That we've never sat down and come together on what is that plan. We don't know. Where do we want to be in 4 or 5 years in terms of the equipment needs, the building needs, et cetera? And that, I don't know whose fault that is that there isn't a plan in place, a plan that will live regardless of who's on city council or who the mayor is. It's too late to do anything about it like right now in this moment when we're trying to work on this budget, but that certainly needs to be a priority next year.
We should have a strategic plan for over 5 years. I know nonprofits have to create a strategic plan and a budget for over 5 years for what they're gonna do with their foundation or what they're gonna do. We should be doing that same thing with the city things. But I agree with Cobb that we have to do that. We can't do it in a vacuum. It's not about council, it's about council and the directors being a part of it and having discussions. But if we had the ability to have discussions with directors all year round, we would have been more prepared to figure out and find out what each department needed, what each department wanted, and what we wanted to add to it. But just off the top of our head, it's very hard to do.
Right, and just to kind of put what you said and what Councilman Cobb and what Councilman Maddox just said, yeah, in retrospect, right now, one of the things we should have done at that budget hearing week was what are council's priorities. The problem is, when you don't have a budget, when we don't have the materials ahead of time, that's a really weird place to just go, oh, and by the way, let's talk about all this other stuff too. So, there are remedies for this. I can tell you in other cities, councils have said, they've by ordinance said, this is the day we're getting the budget materials. And it's in an ordinance, and I don't know what the penalty is for not doing it, but we don't have anything like that here. We just have December 31st, that's it. So maybe that's something we can think about, and then we can plug in a more strategic process. Because I'm all about that. I mean, we did it with economic development, we did it with council, doing legislation. I had a whole ARPA thing that I had presented to council. We should do, here's 10 things we should do. That didn't fly, but nonetheless, I'm all about that. Go ahead, Mayor.
So I want to address something that Councilman Cobb said. I think that he is 100% correct. We do need that planning process. And I do want to address the fault question. Whose fault is it that we don't have sort of that 5-year plan that we want? And further, potentially, honestly, in a certain respect, it's time's fault. Obviously, we can all take some degree of responsibility for our part in the conversation about, how much capital expenditure we expect to look at in 2028 if we want to, but I don't know that that's productive for us to take that on without consideration for the fact that the 2022 budget was crafted by the former form of government. An administration that I think was honestly tasked with keeping the ship afloat until we changed things in in 2022. So that budget was created under that old form. And certainly with the ongoing habit that we had been presenting to our public of the austerity budgets that we've been living with.
Right.
So the first budget that we were able to craft as a new form of government was for the 2023 budget. And, that contained, for the 2023 budget. And that was sort of our first budget. It was our entry into things. A lot of things were uncertain. A great many things were uncertain. That was our first year as a government of this form. What came after that was a budget that was relatively expansive, in part because I knew that we had a whole lot of what I would call and defend calling excess cash that should have been put to good use. And so it was a more expansive budget. But again, the context that we're in is that we are playing catch up. We are not at zero. On the number line here, looking at a 5-year plan, looking at 1 through 5, we're not at zero right now. We're attempting to get back to zero. We're digging ourselves out of a hole in terms of the capacity on staff, in terms of our salaries, in terms of our facilities and their condition, and even the suitability for a modern municipal workforce. Because frankly, I don't think that our facilities are suitable for what we do here. So there's that. So we are digging ourselves out of a hole. It is very, very difficult to come up with a reasonable, reliable plan for continuing regular capital expenditure over, half a decade, when we don't know if the roof is going to collapse at the service garage. Those are the sorts of things that we've been dealing with and giving a great deal of attention and energy to, and time, staff effort, to get to a point where we now see that the leaking roof at Kane Park is being repaired so that it's not leaking on bands and their equipment. So bands might want to come back. Those sorts of things are important expenses, important investments that we need to make. And so when it comes to this 5-year plan, this is what I keep talking about. I've said it a million times. I will continue to say it, that we need to get to a point. That's why the Leopardo deal is so important. Get to a point where we are at least close to zero so that we can start planning for the maintenance of appropriately structured facilities and capital assets. Because we're not there. You can't have police driving around in Crown Vics where the floor is falling out and think about, okay, well, what's a reasonable sort of 5-year plan or 10-year plan? No, we need to get a bunch of cars now because we can't have police we need to do it now. We need to plan and do, but the urgency is doing. And so we purchased a bunch. We're going to purchase more. The difficulty of purchasing these hybrids, which then leads to a reduction in our fuel costs, which is nice. The fact that they are not as available means that when these opportunities come up and when Lieutenant Corrigan finds a set of 5 cars that we can purchase now, when otherwise we might be out of luck because there's competition for these. That's the sort of thing you can't include that in your 5-year plan. We need to get to
Maybe we come up with a shorter term plan that's like a getting back to zero plan, but we need to we do need to plan.
Well, in part, that's the Leopardo deal.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm concerned we're spending a lot of time on stuff that there's other stuff that we need to be working on. But I will tell you, one of my disappointments when I looked at the budget materials is that there was no capital plan, departmental-wise, okay? So we're piecemealing things and getting surprised. So we've talked about, was it 15 cars? How many cars were purchased this year, 10 year? I've kind of come in, but a certain number of cars were recently purchased. Then we have 10 a little bit moving around, but essentially 10 that are gonna go in service between this year and next year. But are there more cars? I mean, I know we've got a lot of officers,
About that.
so how many, I mean,
We've got about, 15, 16 Crown Vics left. That's not the entirety of the cars that we need to take out of service in the next 5 years, but
That's the
okay,
priority.
but this is so in the spirit of ultimate transparency, what council should have received when it came to a capital request from a particular department that uses cars, you've got plenty of them, is like, these are gonna be going out of service on this date. We're gonna need these cars, and you could set the policy because they're your people. You go back 3 years, go 5 years, but give us a schedule so we can actually see that long term. That gives us an idea of, okay, we're gonna have to go into a deficit to purchase some of this. Maybe that's okay, but at least we see where the end in sight is. We see how, I mean, you basically say the ship is leaning too far, it's ready to capsize. Well, I mean, you're righting the ship, so how long is it gonna take to right the ship? That's the kind of information council needs to see in order to make a decision. And when I got these documents, I'm thinking to myself, this is just so piecemeal. It's so, I mean, you know, how can you operate as an effective, efficient organization without having this information? And in the back of my head is any CEO is gonna have his people do that work for him. I think that information is out there. Why aren't we seeing it?
okay, so I can respond and I don't know, obviously I'm not being as clear as I'd like to be. The process by which the mayor presents an estimate of revenues and expenditures, you know, no department head, no division chief presents a capital request to council. That's not how that works. They present capital requests to me,
Right.
and then I present a capital request to council.
You have the big picture.
However, in this case, what I thought was most appropriate, given the fact that I knew that we were going to be forced to some degree to digest some increased personnel costs, I thought that it would be prudent not to unilaterally decide on my own which capital requests, which capital, you know, expenditure possibilities would be forwarded to council without having a discussion with the council, which is why in the budget hearings, you know, the expectation and the continuing expectation is that council will be able to have conversations with the directors, as we did last year, about these things in order to collectively determine what the actual capital requests are going to be. We get to decide what capital we're funding next year out of these funds. Council could decide, we're not doing that. Yeah, I hear your needs about the police cars, but you're gonna have to survive on Crown Vics for a little while longer until we feel more comfortable. And that's council's prerogative to do so, but I thought that it would be more prudent to have an open conversation about each of these capital needs with the council in full view of the public, so that they could understand the conversation that we're having instead of me truncating and narrowing the list of possibilities for council and the public before it even gets to you. Do you hear what I'm saying? This was intended to be an inclusive thing, and you're casting it as though it's some deficiency when it was intended to be a conversation.
It's a deficiency. I'm sorry, but I
Next time,
respect
next
what you
time
said.
I will do it differently.
Well,
Thank you, Council.
I think the council and you have to come to that conclusion, okay? Just not me. Okay? I think that's a conversation we need to have. And it all kind of comes down to what the expectations are we have of each other.
Okay, we gotta move along,
We
so go ahead,
talked about
Councilman.
the unofficial capital request for police.
Right.
And I think, are we now good with that? Are
Give
we
something
able-
else?
Mr. President,
Yeah, well, hold on, the chief has something.
Yeah, I just, you know, thank you, everybody. I just want to clarify one bit that we talked about at the end of our original meeting on the 20th is about the money for the locker room project, if that's still on the table to be moved over to 2025. I just for my,
Is that in the budget someplace?
So that would have to be amended into the budget because the discussion was to be had with council. And it was great to have that discussion because it outlined this possibility for using 2024 dollars based on a discovery of 5 vehicles that we can purchase right now.
Okay, I've got a big question for this council right now. Are we gonna approve a
Wait a
budget?
second. This is about those cruises, and there's two things I need to state. Number one, is I want to keep in mind that we don't just rotate out our cruisers because of mileage. Sometimes accidents are gonna happen, so you have to keep that in mind. But number two, I want to bring back to the public's just reminder again, this is something that I just stated over a half hour ago. This has been stated how we were going to do this collaboratively in terms of those capital improvement projects. Councilman Tosh, I understand you're not happy with that process, but this is absolutely not a deficiency. But you continue to repeat this and make it seem that we weren't advised this when this process started. And to me, that just doesn't seem like good faith at all. And so I don't know if you're not hearing this. I don't know if there's an understanding about this, but there is no written policy or process that stated that the administration had to do this one way or another. This is not a deficiency. You might not agree with the process that they took, but they were very transparent with the process in terms of our capital improvement projects and how we will be discussing those together collaboratively. And I am surprised this is even something that we're having a conversation about, considering these are the type of things that council asked for the administration to do. So now we don't want collaborative conversations, but then we want to pick holes in it later. And so I just want to make this clear. The administration has stated this during the budget hearing and on multiple occasions and at least 4 times tonight. This isn't some deficiency. This was intentional to work with council in a collaborative manner. And for some reason, you're spinning it somewhere else. And I just want you to see how this is looking at this point. Because it's hard to collaborate with someone when you keep calling something a deficiency. That is simply not the way you would have done the process.
Okay,
Please do
it's-
very short and then let's move to
So
the.
I have a big question. So, and it comes down to a meeting we have on Monday, which has a budget in it.
Right.
Are we gonna pass this budget
Well,
without any capital information?
I wanna do this at the end of this conversation. I really do. And that's what I said, I wanna take the temperature before we leave.
I have a question.
Chief, did you wanna say anything else? You wanna know about
I just, for clarity in my mind, is that that money that we didn't spend in 2024, can that be transferred to 2025 so we can
Okay, go ahead, Councilman.
locker room?
I'd have to go back and look at the tape, but I thought it was pretty clear during the budget hearings because we asked you, at least I tried to ask everyone what their wish list was that wasn't on there, and the consensus was that yes, that we wanted that locker room
I just
finished.
wanted to confirm.
It came as news to us that the locker room wasn't finished. It came as news to us that
Should have been
that the
finished.
kitchens in the fire stations that we approved in the budget last year, that hadn't been done. Those are things, in my view, we should not be learning about a year later after we've approved the budget.
And Councilman, I just wanna tell you, I actually asked Addie about a month ago or a little longer. I said, that's something we need to do as a council. And we really need the clerk to do it, cause if you depended on my memory, I don't know. But when we allocate, we need to have status. If we don't request status updates, we may not get them. So that, I want you to know that I hear you on that, and I have asked.
Those lockers should have been done in 2021. We talked about the lockers in 2020. I talked about the lockers in 2021.
But did you pass something in 2021?
They were supposed to get money for the lockers when we got them out of the, you wasn't there, I'm sorry.
That was, ma'am, if I may,
Yes,
so some of that was fixing some of the previous work that was done. So that was
some
part of
work
that,
was
and then
never mind, I hear you.
This was ARPA money that was never used and then taken out.
It was
I don't
taken,
think-
it was
because I don't
taken out
think they were able to get the
completely. We
job.
did actually have that conversation with council. I don't know, I don't believe you were on the council when that occurred. The conversation that we had about the police locker rooms and the contracting process that we were going through to attempt to get that work done was further complicated by requirements of ARPA. The staff capacity, and so we pulled it out and, intended to do it with general fund dollars or for Fund 402 dollars in order to complete that work. However, again, we're dealing with finite resources here. Finite resources both in finance and in the law department. And both of those departments this year have been incredibly burdened, or relatively burdened, relatively overburdened relative to prior years by the amount of work that needed to be done in order to pursue the ARPA allocations in a legal way that won't get clawed back by the federal government. Like that, we've said it. I don't know if anybody remembers us saying this, but this is something that we've talked about. There is an opportunity cost when attorneys are looking at contracts from nonprofits that are not necessarily as proficient at providing the kind of documentation that they needed for those ARPA allocations. There is an opportunity cost when it comes to the time that an attorney can take to work through the contracting problems that we encountered with this police locker room project. We still want to do it. We still want to make these improvements. We've addressed the health and safety improvements that were necessary, that Vice President Russell was mentioning. We've addressed those things. This is a further expanded improvement of the police locker rooms that we continue to want to pursue, but we have to have sufficient capacity, which is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with council in the open so that we can have a real conversation about what we can actually achieve in 2025 when it comes to capital expenditure versus just putting a number into a budget and not spending it again.
Parks and Rec.
Yeah, that's what I was talking. Director Gonzalez, can you just maybe pull the chair up to here because I know that
It'll be Chief Whitney.
pardon? Oh, no, that's true. Yeah, Chief, thank you so much. Maybe you could just sit in Chief Britton's chair.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, Chief.
It's good that you're here.
Questions for Director Gonzalez?
I would just like to know, since you've had some time to familiarize yourself with this long list.
Yeah.
And you had, at the budget hearings, you spoke about security was a priority for you. Are there some things on here that should really go into, rather than tackling them all
Yeah, can I,
into the 2025 capital budget?
if we can we pass this around here? This is basically just a much simpler version of that list that makes things a lot easier for everybody, I think.
Great, Judy, you
Yeah.
have
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience, by the way.
No, you're good, thank you.
So smart.
If we need more, I have more, we'll make sure you get one.
Best way to do it.
Thank you.
Narrow it down.
So, you received that.
At a hearing, yeah.
This is,
The day that Director Gonzalez gave his report.
Sure. If I could, so unfortunately, Director Gonzalez,
I should take one of those two.
I was not able to attend the hearing that you spoke at. The document that was emailed out looks like it's very different from the document that was handed out in person. Do you happen to have the document that was handed out, or Mr. Mayor, do you have it?
This one from before?
I think this is, yeah,
Extremely long.
this was
Yeah.
not emailed out, I don't think. Wait, so then how did you get it if you?
This is a printout that Addie,
This was on,
Okay, then I'll ask
This is-
Addie. Okay.
you could take, you could,
you didn't get this one?
Correct.
yeah, because it's not
What was
electronic,
emailed
it's
out
not.
was not what was distributed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay, I'll.
We would have no way of
All
knowing that,
these
but-
sheets are
And
all separate, they were all handouts.
I responded, the clerk sent an email over to me with a request for electronic versions of certain documents, and I responded and let her know that I would try to sort of reconstruct that from the former interim director's files.
Okay.
To get over to her so that she can provide it to council or put it on the website.
You know, she could just scan what we have. I mean, it's simple.
I suppose that's also a possibility.
I mean,
I saw the request, I responded, now I'm gonna work through getting that to her, if she wants it in a different
Copy
format.
machine, I wonder if the copy machine scans.
She's got scan potential, she doesn't scan.
Director, when you say full-time positions, you mean year-round, of course. Okay, thank you.
And this is, just so you guys know, this is just a real summarized version of my budget hearing. I know that you guys were presented with that really, really long list, and that was compiled before I came on board. And that was just a 3 to 5 year long list of things that we are looking for down the road. So this was just my budget hearing summarized. And how I listed them is how we felt as a staff is the order of importance as well too.
Okay.
And just so we know, I'm just summarizing everything as well too, is like, obviously some of these numbers are fairly large, but that encompasses quite a bit of things in those scopes. So obviously some money would be better than no money, and it could help us accomplish some of the goals that are under those categories. So I just wanted to make that known before we move on.
This is without ARPA funded.
This has nothing to do with ARPA.
Got it.
This is just straight, our absolute wish list for
Yeah.
capital
Okay,
for 2025.
for 2025, correct. And like I said, this is nothing different than what wasn't presented at the budget hearing.
right, I remember all this.
Question?
Yeah, please.
So this sheet on the back, and this isn't a capital, other important items, 2 new full-time positions for Kane Park, stage production specialist and administrative assistant. Is this in addition to that was in the budget request, the 3, here only 2 new full-time positions? A
No.
Kane Park manager and a Kane Park public relations?
So this is where a little confusion happened because the previous director, Director Schuster, and then I believe the mayor came up with the Kane Park manager and Kane Park public relations. I spoke directly to the general park manager, and he told me that these were the positions. So that's where there was some conflict. But they're not in addition. It's just gonna be 2 positions total, whether it's the ones.
How many full-time positions are dedicated to Kane Park?
I believe only 2.
And this would be 2 new in addition to those 2?
That's correct, in addition.
And is there sufficient work to keep these people busy during the off-season? Or are you able to also utilize them for other recreation needs?
No, there is definitely sufficient amount of work down at Kane Park to do year round.
And I don't know that we have gotten an updated accounting on Kane Park. We weren't here last year. A concern of mine was how much money we lost on our concerts.
Okay.
Are you in a position to tell us where we're gonna end the year on the concerts?
I am not, no. I wasn't involved in any of the Director Schuster before she left. I didn't have an opportunity to sit down with her with anything regarding Kane Park expenditures or revenues. So no, I'm not in a position.
Councilman Cobb, I just want to let you know, I did send out an email with that request 2 weeks ago. For the season, I wanted to see, I believe I put it, revenue and expenditures for the 2024 season. So I did not get anything back.
And we have a huge chargeback on the credit cards fees. Are we doing anything to look at how we can reduce those? Do you know? Or you haven't been here long enough?
Yeah, I could definitely take a look at some of those, yeah. What I do know though is that when the credit card is charged, it has to have already an account associated with where we're taking the money and the money's appropriated already. We're not putting a deficit into an account that if a credit card is charged and whatnot, but I can take a look further at
All right.
what we're
And I take it you haven't had a chance to go through the expense budget worksheet yet in any detail? Or have you?
I a little bit, yeah. Like I said, I haven't because of the unfortunate situation with Tara Schuster leaving. I really haven't had an opportunity to sit down with anybody in finance completely to go over, you know, the budget and different things like that. So I've been learning as I go, different things. So I can answer some things and I can't answer some things.
Okay.
Go ahead, Council.
Thank you. Because my view is that in 2-3 years, we may be in a situation where we have to lay staff members off. I think it's really important that we're thinking critically about adding new folks to the payroll. And so would you be able to tell us why these 4 positions between the community center and Kane Park are essential?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you have a preference where we start then? No. So I guess because we've been talking about Kane Park, the stage production specialist / for the facility coordinator, basically that person, we're getting $800,000 worth of brand new AV equipment and whatnot. So the person that we're hiring here is going to be primarily responsible for that AV equipment, maintaining it, keeping it up to speed, running the production, setting up, tearing down, all that good stuff during the season and off season, keeping that equipment, you know, up to date and all that good stuff, and making sure, in addition to helping the facility out and whatnot. The administrative assistant position at Kane Park right now, those guys are kind of doing everything. So this administrative assistant position would help with all, if you know anything about Kane Park, we have a lot of independent contractors that come through here, which means a lot of contracts, a lot of payroll, different things like that. So this administrative assistant would be taking on a lot of those responsibilities of making sure the payroll's up to speed, you know, all that good stuff. A lot of the paperwork, administrative stuff that would free up our general manager and the other position as well too, to do actual production stuff that they should be doing, that they're taking a lot of time not doing right now.
For administrators.
Yeah. And then as far as the position changes in recreation center that, you know, I presented, the one of them would be the recreation specialist, which as a full-time position, same kind of principles as that. Right now, I don't have many people that are there. I have a great staff and they know exactly what they're doing in their departments, but I don't have really many people that are cross-trained in many different things. My goal is to eventually get there, but in the immediate future, this recreation specialist will be a person that's gonna kind of bounce from department to department. I don't have a swing person that can fill in if a person goes out on vacation in a certain department, like the ice rink or the sports arena or different things like that. Perfect example is like we had our Office of Aging supervisor that left, and there was nobody really cross-trained to be able to step into that role to fill in. Currently, Miss Andrea Heim is stepping to the plate and doing a fantastic job splitting roles here at City Hall and at our senior center. But my goal is to have like a person like this that would be able to fill in. Like if we lose a position, we won't miss a beat and that aspect of things. So that's where this recreation specialist will kind of come in. It basically serves underneath. My ultimate goal would be to serve underneath our assistant directors and assistant commissioners, but above our supervisors that we have, if that makes sense, to kind of fill in the roles in that aspect of things.
I heard you mention about the senior center, and we've been trying to get some staff over there for a while. What is your expectation as far as the senior center and staff over there?
Yeah, so there's currently many positions that are on the books that just haven't been filled yet. So it's at the top of my priority list to post those positions and get those positions filled.
How many positions are budgeted for?
There's currently, we're right now we're short one administrative assistant position, and that administrative assistant position, because like I said, I'm very big on cross-training. So the administrative assistant is gonna be a combination of senior center and also community center, so it's gonna help out in both aspects. And then primarily senior center related. And then also, I'm not sure what the official title is, but we're short, let's call it like a social worker. I can't tell you what the exact title is, but we're short that position. Unfortunately, the position was filled by a lady that passed away. And that position still hasn't been filled, so that's another position that is on the books that we're looking to fill immediately.
I know with those two positions, they still was in dire need of another position. So I just wanted to keep that in the back of your mind as well.
Yeah, and we
They were still running short with just two people.
we have a brand new supervisor coming in, Office of Aging Supervisor.
Oh, okay.
So that position we just recently offered and was accepted, so that person's gonna be starting on Monday. So what I plan to do is get this person accustomed to what's going on in the department, and then they can actually assess the needs, and then hopefully, you know, we can move through 2025 and then see in our 2026 budget if something is necessary, we can make any adjustments at that point.
And
No, please.
I definitely need to, and I know you can't do it now, but I definitely want a detailed allocation of the recreation fees for the concession stands and the alcohol beverage sales at Kane Park. So that's usually cash funds versus other funds, so I'd like to know what that cash is.
I can provide a little bit of information, just so you know. Historically, we have not sold the concessions ourselves.
Correct.
We contracted with, and so we didn't really budget for that kind of thing in any meaningful way. This year, we are expecting, or estimating in a very conservative way, around $100,000 in concessions revenue. However, for next year, that's what we're estimating. However, this year to date, and you know, the season's over, so this should be it. We looked at, we brought in around $180,000 in concessions revenue. Now, before, what we budgeted for was $5,000. We were budgeting for $5,000 of revenue in concessions, and we, you know, made 180.9 thousand.
Does that go into the general fund? Where's that?
I'm almost positive it goes back into the general fund.
Well, that I'm not entirely sure about. We might have to take a look at that, because that is budgeted in Fund 215. Now, you know, whether or not that money comes in, goes into the general fund, and then we determine that we're going to, you know, expend that out of Fund 215, you know, council can do that, but, you know, Kane Park is not an enterprise fund. So, you know, we don't expect necessarily that all of the money that Kane Park makes goes into Kane Park operations. However, you know, sometimes we expect it to run like an enterprise fund, even though it really probably shouldn't, unless we were to spin it off into an external entity. But yeah, so the concession revenue, it may very well go back into the general fund, but I don't want to presume necessarily.
I thought it did, but I could be completely wrong, but I thought it did. Just off my
You can give me that information, I appreciate it.
So what's, okay, I'm the new guy here in the room. What I think is.
I'm the new guy in the room.
Wait a minute.
He's the new guy in the room.
Let's arm wrestle for the win. So, you know, one of the things that is I'm gonna use the word missing, maybe it's an inappropriate word, but one of the things that I think would be helpful to sort of look at your overall expense is actually kind of a like a balance a balance sheet that sort of shows by Kane Park, you know, by the recreation program, you know, this is how much it's bringing in. This is what the expenses are. We're obviously not making financial decisions necessarily based on those financial statements, but we know that you run at a deficit for the good of the community because we have people that are enjoying events at Kane Park. We have you know, people that enjoy our recreation program, which brings along how many people? I mean, are those growing? Do you need funding to, let's say, do a whole nother sport? Or do you need to expand sports? And I mean, that's, in my eyes, critical in any kind of budget process. And this is not, you came in when I think all this work was done, so please don't look at anything as I'm saying as critical, because it's not meant to be, and it's certainly not intended to be. But the issue here is when we're making decisions about funding FTEs, like expanding the FTEs, you almost have to have that information, especially if you've got a whole overall deficit budget, because here we are making an investment. What are we making that investment for? I mean, if someone shows me we are impacting the lives of 300,000 kids, okay? And I know we can increase that by another 20,000. That's gold. We'll throw money at that. I'm pulling numbers out of thin air. It's kind of like the thing is with Kane Park. And it sounds like we've asked for this information. Maybe it's already been presented in other years. I mean, I'm not sure what the ask was, but I mean, you know, what's going on in Kane Park? A lot of great things that we hear, but it costs money. I mean, I have no idea if we're subsidizing it. So if we're subsidizing it, then are we spending more money to put more deficit in there just to make lives, you know, worker lives maybe easier? Maybe we can apply them to something else. I mean, this is where you really need to have more information. And information that I think we absolutely have to have. It's certainly not gonna be in time for this budget. But
the mayor actually has talked about this before, about, you know, there are some, you know, plays and so forth that are kind of more of a subsidized thing, and then there are some acts that come in that we're intending on making, you know, at least breaking even, right? Or if not, making it, do you wanna?
Yeah. So I think we're on a particular path of professionalizing Kane Park. I think Kane Park is, it's relatively unique. There aren't very many of these around. I think there are only 2 in Ohio that are municipally owned and managed. So there aren't a lot of, and certainly none as old as Kane Park. Or very few as old as Kane Park. And, you know, so over the years, I think this is sort of me editorializing a little bit, and there are people with much longer history with Kane Park than I've been able to glean and gather from a variety of different historical sources. But what I've been able to gather from Kane Park is that the government has treated it like it's something separate that we're subsidizing, as opposed to a piece of the service that we offer, you know? And so it's almost like if we were to expect police to survive on the ticket revenue or, you know, just fines, you know what I mean? So like, we're not subsidizing police, we're funding police as a municipality. A long time ago.
Service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, a long time ago, Cleveland Heights decided, well before any of us were in these roles, decided that Kane Park was something that we should have in this city. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, we could demolish it. You know what I mean? We could get rid of it and just have Kane Park be a park where people play and that kind of thing, and not, you know, deal with a concert venue anymore if we wanted to. We could make that choice. But a long time ago, we decided that this was something that not only were we going to build as sort of this open air, you know, theater, but then invest in to some degree by putting the roof up, putting the seats in, updating the seats, updating the lights, updating the sound, so on and so forth. Now, we're in the year 2024, and, the lighting that we have is 30 years old. That we're using, those sorts of things. We're renting equipment when we could be purchasing, right? Those sorts of things that we've been doing over the last probably 25 years. The city has sort of neglected investment in Kane Park in a relatively dramatic way. I mean, we see it elsewhere in the city as well, but I think Kane Park is probably special in this regard. Part of the difficulty, and again, this is me editorializing, and other people might have different opinions, but this is based on what I've observed. Part of the difficulty is that the vast majority of the people who work in Kane Park on a yearly basis are people who come in for the season and leave. They're not permanent employees. They may be here this year, they may not be here next year. Those sorts of things create, and additionally, the actual distance from City Hall to Kane Park makes that difficult as well in thinking of Kane Park as a piece of the city, as opposed to something that we would treat as an enterprise fund or treat as an independent business that we are subsidizing with public funds. It's not that though. But in this case, if we're on a journey to professionalizing that concert and theater venue, if that's what we're trying to do, and that's been the goal that I've expressed to this council and to the public, that we're trying to professionalize that. And what that means is investing in personnel that can manage and run a concert venue and a theater, venue. And without doing that, what we'll see is a return to what I saw over the last, several years, certainly before this season, which had a completely different response from the people of Cleveland Heights. But previous seasons in the recent past, people are saying, what the heck? This wasn't, what are these acts that we're attracting? I don't have any interest in seeing these acts. What is the actual promotion that we're doing in a modern context now? How are we actually pursuing this? You can't get people in seats if you don't have acts people want to see, for one. You can't get people in seats if they don't know that we have acts that they want to see. And three, we can't get the acts that they want to see if we don't have a professionalized staff that can work with those acts, work with those booking agents, and a facility where artists want to be in order to play to a crowd. All of those things are sort of a holistic look at a concert venue. Now, again, we could decide that we don't want to invest in that. And I recognize the indigestion of, the type of investment that I think is necessary, and in discussion with people who have more experience in, sound engineering and managing a venue and those sorts of things. The indigestion of putting this money into this equipment, for instance, or hiring somebody in order to have a professional venue that can actually begin to attract more people on a consistent basis, I'll say the way that the changes that we made showed improvement in the season this year. Like very, very clear, obvious improvement in the season and the response from the community at large to that season. So I think we're headed in the right direction. I can completely understand, and you've mentioned it, the difficulty of sort of justifying what a municipality does usually isn't running a concert venue, but it's there. And we can either neglect it, continue to neglect it as we have for the last 30 years, or we can do the more responsible thing, forward-looking thing, invest in it. And many businesses fail within the first 5 years.
So
Wait,
I appreciate all this. But
before I get there,
you gotta,
I'm just saying, within that 5 years, whether or not you're gonna fail, you may not turn the profit in that first year. Now, this isn't a separate business. It's not a profit-making entity. We can decide it needs to be, and we won't fund it if it's not. I think that's a mistake.
So I don't, I mean, you're responding to my questions. I mean, you must have some data to realize that it sounds like there was a home run hit this year.
Well, I would say that they're, in terms of the community response.
Well, let's,
Well, we'd like to see it.
that's great. We need to see that.
Yeah, I
I mean, especially if we're asked to increase the number of FTEs,
So
we need to
is there
see
a way,
that.
is
Absolutely,
there a way we could do that?
You can see it, yeah, but I'm not sure that what you will see will actually convey what you think.
That's okay.
And this is what I mean by that. Our city is funded primarily from income taxes, to a lesser extent, some property taxes.
Go ahead, Councilman.
Okay?
I see.
So the budget here, if they're close to 2 million this year, if I'm reading this correctly, and 1.8 for next year, plus we're approving significant capital investments. I mean, I understand everything that you said, but show us the numbers. Show us the attendance numbers, show us the revenue
And
from
the cost.
the concerts. And my issue again was, should we be trying to be in the rock promotion business ourselves, or is that something that is better contracted out to someone else that takes the risk of bringing the acts in and the money? But for me personally, I can't vote on a budget for Kane Park until I see some numbers.
That's fine, you can see some numbers, we'll get you some numbers. I will say and I think that this is very important for me to say to this council. Council has instituted a cap on the amount that can be charged for ticket sales at Kane Park. I wanna make that point. Why did we do that? Why did this council, not these particular people,
Right.
but the council of the city of Cleveland Heights instituted a cap on the
You're
amount
right, for
that can be
philosophical
charged.
purposes.
I'm
Because
just saying, yeah, we can revisit that, we can have a conversation about that. But there is gonna be no conversation about revenue versus expenditure, especially if you're talking about the deferred capital improvement that is necessary in order for this place to be a success. Necessary. We're not going to get there. We can look at the numbers. I'm just saying they're not going to tell the story.
So someone has to
Especially the
tell us to
story about
remove the cap
increase in
then.
property values from being located to something like that.
The cap was
Next-
raised.
the cap was raised, but I will tell you, in the last 5 years,
Yeah.
the money people pay for concerts it's night and day. It's like the housing market, what's happened in the last 2 years. But Mayor, if we have, I mean, I know you said yes, and we'll get the numbers and we'll look at them. That's how we'll decide, do we wanna continue subsidizing or do we wanna raise the prices?
It can be
And-
different language than subsidizing,
Okay.
because again, this
I'm
is not
not
an
trying to,
enterprise fund,
I'm not
it's
saying
not
that
a
to
separate
characterize
business.
it. I'm just talking, just blunt. I'm not trying to recharacterize it. Go ahead.
Ty, is it okay to change it to a different item?
As long as, is it on Parks and Rec? Yes, please.
Well, it's not on the Parks and Rec, and I'm concerned about it. It's on the first list, Director Gonzalez, about the Denison Park splash pad, which I've been waiting for 3 years to have installed. I would hope that you would consider adding that, and the mayor would perhaps tell you what needs to be done in terms of what, we need to see a splash pad for that neighborhood and the community, please.
It's overdue.
Isn't it sitting in, when I drive through the rec center, isn't it sitting on a pallet?
We've got equipment waiting. Part of what we're doing right now in the demolition of the old pool house and the shed over there and some changes to the land around it will allow us to actually install a splash pad there where the Denison pool used to be. Again, this was a function, I think this process began before my term as mayor, but
Mayor Sarin, I understand that, but it's time,
oh yeah.
please.
Oh no, it was my full expectation that this would already be done.
Thank you.
Are we gonna go through the capital?
Yeah, I think we should, but go ahead. Yeah, no, please, no.
It is going on 8:30.
Yeah.
I get up at 4 a.m. to go to work. And I have enjoyed the elaborate comments on every item that has put us here for 3 hours. And we have not really gotten to a real sense of what we're doing here. And I gotta go to work. Although I love you all as council people and I love doing my job as council, but I do have a real job outside of this real council job. So you all have about 5 more minutes of my time and I'm gonna have to excuse myself. So I just need everybody to know that.
Oh, that's fair.
And we
That's
can
very
set-
fair.
Set up
And I
another
don't,
time.
and we, Bill Hannah and I were talking about this earlier.
He said no
He
more.
said 3 hours is pretty much the limit when anything productive happens and I think it is question. Go ahead.
I do have one question for Mr. Phelps, that is regarding finance, if I could just ask it real, I'm sorry, Director Gonzalez. When you're looking to see how this department operates, the finance department for Cleveland Heights, will you please look at the adequacy of the software?
Okay.
It's really important to some of us because we've heard that it's difficult to enter journal entries. It's difficult to write reports. And in 2024, finance reports should be readily available.
Right.
So I would appreciate it if you
Okay.
would. Thank you, President.
Just as a reminder, I think the original purpose for this meeting was to talk about the legislation that we chose not to vote on the other night. So I sat down, I tried to go through this. I want to make sure that we have time to go through this. It would be helpful if we could, line by line, so that we can understand what's happening after we talk about the capital request for Parks and Rec.
Okay, so so you wanna go through
I mean, like we went through with police, I
Yeah.
think that it would be helpful if we went through the capital request for Parks and Rec, settled on something, and then also took time to go through the legislation that we did vote on.
I thought that Councilman Potts said that he needed more documentation for that,
For,
to go through the capital for Parks and Rec.
Well, to make a decision, I don't wanna speak for you, but I think the idea was, do we really know where we're at, where we could say yes or no?
I mean, I think we've gotta put some, we have to put some placeholder numbers in the budget, for some of these capital improvements. And we have not gotten information to tell us what priorities are there or not, so we are relying on staff to tell us what they need. But if we're gonna try to pass the budget, which is on the agenda for Monday, we need the budget to be recrafted to include some of these capital items in it. I think we got some bigger issues with the numbers, but that's, I mean, if we're gonna continue this, that's fine. But I think some of these things that Davida, you need to be a part of, okay? And I fully respect the fact that you have to get up early for your job and you should be allowed to leave. But I don't feel comfortable having additional conversations with you not here because of that. I also don't know what our agenda is on Monday. I mean, there's some, just on my, just on my little list, we've gotten through basically item 3 out of 18. Okay, we're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. It's not about my list, okay?
No, but all of this will be on, and we're gonna get the legislation tomorrow. The agenda for Monday. We're gonna get the agenda for Monday tomorrow.
But you're spending another 20 minutes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't talk over you, please finish.
No, that's it.
Well, we're gonna need more than 20 minutes.
I know, well, we'll have, we can start earlier. Well, not really, but we could, if we had to. Oh, no, that's right, we're starting at 6:30. So we have 6:30 to 8 o'clock blocked off for this on Monday.
We have no idea what's gonna be in the packet. It's gonna be another packet that if it's fully baked, it's probably gonna be half baked because that's what they usually are. So we have to rework.
That wasn't
It's
completely
completely fair.
But
You
I-
had some big issues that just get left off and just show up,
I
and
think,
it's
I
not
think
fair.
maybe we could, if we could, just sort of maintain a little bit of decorum and stop with the snipes.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
it's not
disappointed,
just,
sorry.
that happens sometimes, not necessarily from.
Question, so
Yeah.
Monday, we're just doing the budget adjustment, right?
Monday, there's a pretty full agenda, actually, but
Budget adjustment as opposed to passing
The
a
budget.
2025 budget.
correct.
Second
Passing a
reading,
2025
something,
budget.
there's, it's,
Well,
We're not
everything-
passing a 2025 budget in a special meeting
Yeah,
on the 9th of December.
No, we're not-
I wouldn't imagine
we're not doing
that would
that.
ever be the case.
can,
But I mean, it's not even ready for first reading.
In fact, no, it's
No.
already had first reading. The point is that at this point, it is council's responsibility to make amendments based on the discussion that council has and council's, degree of comfort with this particular budget. If there are, and that's why we're having this discussion with the directors and the chiefs in order to develop a list of amendments that council is comfortable with so that council can amend the legislation that's been introduced in order to pass it. Now, we have had conversation already, and I know we have a lot of conversation. And some of these details get missed or forgotten. But it was always at least the anticipation, at least that we had conversation about this not being passed on 2 readings. That's definitely something that we've addressed and discussed.
I just feel like right now I need to kind of cut to the chase a little bit because, although Councilman Petrus's idea of, or I don't know, it's kind of both yours, of like coming up with some kind of capital budget process. I mean, I don't see how we're gonna get through that. I mean, I'm gonna look at this, but I'm just reacting almost viscerally to it. And, then there's 10 other directors we'd have to go through this same thing with. And I know we're not gonna be able to do that on Monday, just because even if the directors were all present. But my question is, here's where I think we're at, and then I wanna hear from you because we do have to wrap this up. And I'm not even asking my questions, which I wrote down as we went. The mayor has described this year and this budget as an anomaly. And my question is, do we still wanna go ahead and try to do regular order, meaning, get a budget by December 31st, when we know this has been an anomaly? And there's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of things we're not gonna be able to get to in another meeting or two. And I feel like, I don't know where everybody's at, but I think it's like we're saying this is an anomaly, but we just wanna go ahead anyway. And I don't know, where are you guys at? I mean, are we gonna be able to vote on a budget given everything we know that still needs to be done and what we don't know and your level of comfort?
My level of comfort says without the 2023 audit available to us and without current financial reports for 2024, I'm not ready to vote on a budget by 12/31/2024. That is where I'm coming from.
Petrus?
I mean, unless we can, I think it's maybe possible to work through some of these things, like identifying capital expenses to include. But I still go back to my belief that we need to account for things like the service worker renegotiation, the salary survey increases, the potential pension contribution increase. Granted, that hasn't been, that one is a little more flexible. But those are things that I feel like need to be included. And there are things like the recreation expenses that Councilman Cobb asked that the recreation fee and learning what that has been going to. Have not heard about that. Learning more about the King Park numbers, which we have not received. Those are things that I think that are important. I also, Posh's questions, I think, like I said, I had some of those as well. I'd like to see those answered. We hope to have those answered today. They're not answered today, so I don't have much confidence that we're going to be able to answer those and, fold all of this other stuff in quick order. I just don't think that it's going to happen realistically.
I can't vote on a budget without having some of these questions answered. I just can't. I mean, and it's more than just capital.
I have all those concerns and, you know, we need a finance director that can give us advice. I'm glad that you're here. It's gonna take you some time to get up to speed and have conversations with all of these directors and department heads that have come before us. I'd also be interested in hearing last year, the finance director told us, well, that's not prudent to be spending this money. I wanna know, you know, where are we in 2 years? It's just, you know, I just can't go on faith that things are gonna work out for next year. There are a lot of contingencies.
Vice President?
I agree. I ain't gonna say nothing else longer.
Mr. President,
Councilman Maddox, I just want to ask everybody.
I don't have a comment on at this point on it.
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the last time we discussed the idea of, I don't know, I don't want to, maybe it's sniping, and I should restrain myself. I said it last time, but maybe I'll refrain.
Oh, we heard you.
The idea of, the comparison to another deliberative body. The idea of doing some sort of continuing resolution or
Temporary budget.
For some, we do see examples of that. We have seen examples of that. In the last meeting where we discussed this, I said it's a terrible idea, and it's harmful. A resident who watched that meeting came up to me last night, and told me that I should have said, and here's why. I thought that I was clear. Obviously, I was not. But the here's why is not just the sort of philosophical adherence to this city having a history of passing a yearly budget, with a deadline of, providing estimates of things, and moving through a process between November 15th and December 31st. That is sort of the historic,
Mayor, I don't need to
traditional.
be polite. I gotta go.
Have a good night. So there's the tradition that I would prefer we upheld, but much more importantly than that is the fact that every single one of these directors and chiefs is starting the year with an expectation, with a particular expectation, and working, say, in the first 3 months to achieve goals in the third 3 months of the year. If we don't have at least operational budget in place in January, we have a great deal of uncertainty for the rest of the year when it comes to these things. So, for instance, we don't have an operational budget in place before the end of the year. What does that do to our fire personnel? Are we cutting in 3 months? Are we removing people from fire? They don't know. They can't know. The firefighters themselves can't know if their positions are funded for the rest of the year. The level of uncertainty, the increase in our difficulty as an administration and as a council in planning and having any idea what that year is going to look like is decreased dramatically, and it will have a demonstrable negative impact on our ability to provide important services to the residents of Cleveland Heights. That's the real substantive reason why we would like to have a budget in place January 1 so that we know from January 1 to December 31, in the absence of any budget amendments throughout the course of the year, we have an understanding of what the guidelines are.
Right, yeah.
Now, to say that anybody on this council or the mayor can't provide and introduce a budget amendment throughout the course of the year as we respond to initial concerns that come up Of course we can. That's something that is baked into this process. We don't set a budget, we don't, write it in stone. But it is important to have a basic understanding of our operational capacity at the beginning of the year so that we can have a complete understanding of at least what the bare minimum is going to be absent some calamity. So, and that allows for directors and chiefs to be able to plan how they deploy. Whether or not they can actually, pursue the addition of officers to patrol a music hop, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say that I am going to do my level best to address a majority of this council's concerns, or rather, the concerns of a majority of this council, in order to pass this budget and to address some specific concerns that Councilman Petrus brought up. I think that it can be useful to think about and add some padding potentially for certain things. In the same way that, we haven't passed a 3% COLA next year yet. But the interim finance director put in that 3% because there's an anticipation based on history that, we're gonna be looking at a 3% COLA. Perhaps we won't. Maybe next year it'll be a 2% COLA. Maybe we'll look at inflation and think about that, and we'll decide, what? I think based on the way cost of living has increased, maybe we'll do a 4% COLA this year, 3.5. But in anticipation of something, she added 3% COLA into the salary line. Now, and benefits line. Now, that's useful, right? However, and I'm gonna ask you, Director, to stop me from talking if you feel that I need to, based on what I'm about to say, okay?
Wow, okay.
All right, so I'm gonna caveat this by saying, from my perspective, in the negotiation that we had with Labor's Local 860 in 2022, I thought that they were extremely generous with us. I think that they were, very reasonable partners in that negotiation.
Let's try to help.
To the degree, thank you, to the degree that, that went extremely smoothly. But I don't necessarily anticipate, based on the increases that were baked into that particular contract and what we've experienced since then, that things will remain exactly the same as that initial negotiation. However, we don't know how that negotiation is going to go. We can't know.
Service workers.
Yeah, local 860, that's, in Parks and Recreation and in Public Works, that's the union that represents workers in both of those departments. We don't know what the results of that negotiation process is gonna be. We don't know, we can't know. We don't know if it's gonna go to, fact finding, we don't know, all of these things, we simply can't know. One thing that I think we should avoid is having some hypothetical discussion about how much we should put into the budget in order to account for some hypothetical increase in salaries and benefits that may be the result of that negotiation. Because in a certain respect, that public decision-making process, this isn't going to be an antagonistic situation. I don't have any need to be antagonistic with Labor's Local 860. I want to work with them as partners and find something that makes sense both for the city's budget and for them as workers, because we want to be able to attract and retain really good workers. And I know that the world has changed around them. I recognize that and I'm sensitive to it. I also don't want to unnecessarily provide additional, let's say, if you're playing poker with somebody You don't lay your hand on the table while you play.
That's probably a good place, Mayor.
This
Okay.
is,
Yeah.
this is,
So.
But the
so-
other items, like COLA, we should be able to estimate.
Yeah, and, you know, I appreciate you actually, you know, instead of just saying this would be really bad, you know, saying why, because I mean, that gives us some context.
Now, I know, I don't take anybody's vote for granted,
No, I
and so I'm
don't
going
think
to
you
do
are.
my damnedest to address
I
every
don't
single
think you are.
concern as much as I can.
I mean, the thing is that, you know, those unknowns and the unknowns that we'd be putting forward by doing a temporary budget, I understand that side of it. I also understand that we have a responsibility that when, you know, as watchdogs of the budget, as people are saying, yes, this is okay, we're stewards of your tax dollars. And doing that with, you know, a lot of trepidation and a lot of unanswered questions and, you know, and look, I do want to say this. This is a far cry from what used to happen with the city manager. I want to recognize that.
Even this,
No, this-
even this.
Oh, no, this and everything, because I saw what it was. It was a couple hours around this table. She put up a few slides and, you know, that was it. That was literally it. There were no, you know, hearings and all that stuff. So, you know, you gotta, I mean, you know, give you props for that.
yeah, two very quick things. Regarding the service workers, there's a simple solution to satisfy what I would think council's need is. Just give us what the total number of what their total pay is, okay? Put it on a schedule, put it on a line item, and have us, and just have a line next to it that says this is, we're bargaining an agreement here. And if we see a $10,000 number or a $10 million number in our heads, we know if it's gonna be a 5% increase, it's gonna be a 5% increase. There's probably gonna be an executive session, but and don't put it in the budget, but at least we know that it's gonna be possibly 2, 10, 50, who knows what the number's gonna be. I think everybody's gonna be bargaining in good faith. And we could read in between the lines, but at least we have no scope, no idea of what it means. I have to tell you, I understand your plea about getting a budget passed. I could not agree more. It's putting this city at a disadvantage that we can't get a budget passed. And I'm getting the impression that it's being put on council's shoulder because council is not passing this budget by the end of the year. Maybe we will, but it doesn't sound like we're gonna be passing this budget by the end of the year, just based on what this conversation just had.
I'm remaining optimistic.
We received a 17-page budget book this year. Last year it was 84. I'm not gonna go into any of the detail or the number of questions. We've all thrown a lot of questions at you, but we received a lot less information this year than we received in other years. The process started very, very low. That's not on council's shoulders. We will work with you to get this done and get it done right, but this is not on council's shoulders, okay? I just wanna make sure that that's really, really clear. And I think we suggested tonight's meeting. I'm willing to meet more. I do believe that there's not gonna be a quorum after the 19th. That's sort of what I heard. There's no meetings after the 19th. So there's a lot of things that have to, I think.
I just, you know, one thing is, whatever we do, we have to curtail the philosophical discussions and just go, you know, really methodically through the agenda. Because we really didn't do, that's what we did not accomplish. I think we have a better understanding of where everybody's at, but so all this legislation that's on our agenda, you know, we'll discuss it during committee of the whole, you know, on Monday. Go ahead, Councilman.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, you had like, I thought you had a look.
No, I was just thinking about the legislation that we did not vote on.
That's what I'm holding up. I just have a pivot, yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, whether or not we want to move that forward then or a week from then, but I think we did have consensus on the cars,
Yes.
you know? And so that was two pieces, right?
The factor.
And the
Right.
vacuum, the big
The
$500,000
equipment purchases
vacuum.
are on there.
Yeah, so, I
Those are the
mean,
two key things.
Well, I mean, this document that we received, these journal entries,
Yes.
self-insurance losses, 70,000, settlements, 5,000, settlements, 17,250. Like, getting clarification on this and understanding how this all comes together would be helpful for me, because I was not prepared on Monday to vote for this, because I sat down, I looked at this, I made a good faith effort to try to understand this, and it seemed like multiple things were happening here. Some money was being pulled from 24 into 25. It seems like there are some increased expenses that we were trying to cover. And then also there's information about the TIF in here. And so going through this, because still as of right now, I don't feel that I have the information that I would have wanted to make a decision. And I think that that was the purpose of this meeting, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we don't have it today, I would put it back in an email and just say, for Monday, mayor, and copy whatever department person needs to be. I have one question. Does anybody want to do anything else in this meeting right now?
I'd like to do one more thing.
Okay.
And that one thing is to simply state that many of the things in the budget adjustment that was requested are very easily explained and relatively perfunctory. The example that you mentioned about self-insurance losses, fees received for settlement and paid out fees, or funds received for settlement. In order to achieve that, we need to increase the budget so that we can pay certain things. It's the same with mailing out certified letters for the special assessment, for the tree fund. We need to mail out those letters, and we need to increase, by $4,600 funds in 231 so that we can send out those letters. It's not controversial work unless, let me not assume. I know every single dollar that we spend counts. I know that. I know that me saying $4,600, it may seem like I'm minimizing something, and I'm not. I don't think that we've ever had this much difficulty doing this kind of thing before. At least as long as I've been sort of engaged with this city government. So little things like, the budget related to the NOPEC fund. These are grant funds that we use to do energy efficiency things. The top of the hill payment for the TIF, that's something we just gotta do. It's money that comes in. In order to send it where it needs to go, we need to budget for it. That's it. It's not like, we're doing something irresponsible or confusing. It's just, this is a budgetary exercise, in order to be able to send the top of the hill payments for the TIF where they need to go. We need to budget for it so that we can do that. That's why I think I'm maybe having a little bit of confusion about we already agreed to purchasing a parking lot in the Cedar Fairmount district and, giving a loan to the Russos to do their project. We agreed to that. This is the step that comes next so that we can fulfill what we agreed to. Those sorts of things are relatively easily understood. I know you guys understand it. I'm not saying that you don't. And some of them are like the transfer station, the repairs for the transfer station, which need to be made. Now, we need to be able to take from our transfer station the work that we'd be doing at our transfer station and find an alternative. That alternative was going to be Shaker Heights. But Shaker Heights is in the middle of a repair now. But so we're taking it out of capital for this year that we budgeted for, and the expectation, and that's a reduction.
Could I just say that Councilman Petrus, I assume that you have specific questions about it's not like we need to go over every line, right? It's just there's some that stand. Oh, we do need to.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that would be helpful. I'm glad that you mentioned the parking lot. I remember.
Okay, I thought you were just going to pull out like 2 or 3 or something.
No, I mean it's just 2 pages, so I think that it would be helpful if we went through them. I am happy to call you tomorrow if you would have time. 15 minutes. I don't know. Other folks might be interested in hearing the information as well. But, you know, for example, the parking lot, Assistant Director Anderson told us, I think that it was like 2 months ago or maybe longer, that deal closed. And I'm wondering, wait, we haven't paid them? When during the hearing, that was a specific question I asked. Do we have any outstanding bills? And I was told no. And now we're seeing that supposedly we haven't paid them for the parking lot that we were told 2 months ago the deal was done for. So if I could send you sometimes when I would be available, and then if there's a time that would work for you.
Well, I'm not gonna discourage anybody from going line by, we gotta, if we're not ready to vote, then we need to keep asking questions.
I mean, like the transfer station, was that a 2020 was that a capital project that was supposed to be done this year?
Exactly. And so we've had that discussion
wait.
about the transfer station not being able to be done this year, and you know exactly the reason why.
So is it gonna carry over into next year?
If council determines that it passes a budget with that
No.
requesting-
Are you requesting us to include that in the capital budget for next year?
So in this budget adjustment, there is sort of an expectation or a hope that this might be included in next year's capital budget. That doesn't mean, first of all, that it needs to be included in the budget that we pass this month. So that's the first thing. The second thing, because ultimately, we don't know if we're going to be using Shaker's transfer station or not. That agreement hasn't been cemented as far as I know. We don't actually know if we're gonna be able to do that. So we could postpone that decision, but we know that we're not doing this work this year, so reducing, this is just a reduction. It's not, a transfer. So that's why, we look at some of these separately, and then we make a determination collectively about what next year's budget is going to be. But reducing by $850,000 the 416 fund, Rookies Capital Fund, shouldn't be a controversial thing because we're not going to be spending that $850,000 this year.
So item number 2 on my list, which I was hopeful that we're gonna go through, what other things, like the transfer station, were not able to be done this year? You can't answer this right now, but this is why I'm asking the question.
I think that's the other thing. Over
We
the
don't-
course of the year, we have discussed many of these projects already, but we haven't discussed them all of a piece. And some of that's because it's multiple departments, multiple committees that might be looking at it.
But there's a total amount of what these are. This is $800,000. It's another $800,000 that's gonna go into a deficit for next year.
That's why you have to synthesize these.
That's why we need to know what the list is,
That's a maybe.
okay? Well, if we can't use our transfer station because we have to spend $800,000 on it, we have to use the transfer station. It's like having a leaky roof. It's part of what we do. It's probably picking up trash is probably one of the most important things to do. And so this is why we have to know this information. And we don't know it. And that's why we're pleading to try to get the data.
Okay, about the transfer station specifically, what is the data that you need about the transfer station?
Well, I don't need the data specific about the transfer station. We need to know all of the 2024 things that were in the budget that are not gonna carry over, that you have the expectation that should carry over because they have to carry over. The transfer station for me seems like that's a have to be done, okay? And there's gotta be a whole, this just sort of, again, it's just sort of like an unknown, shows up an hour or two before meeting, it's impactful on the budget, which we don't know about.
Let's at least
This is
try
what
to-
we need to have.
This is exactly the reason why I brought Director Cleanscale to this meeting, and nobody asked her this question.
We asked you in total to get the number and number 2. That would have given us this answer, okay? It's just not the transfer station. There's gotta be other things besides the transfer station that we don't know about.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
so for the remaining council members that are in this room, is it their expectation or understanding that none of these things were discussed throughout the year at all? Because that's different. What I'm hearing is that we weren't giving any updates, and that's not true. Number one, we were told all year long we were on these projects. If you wanted a list, you should have asked for it. That is not the same as not getting it.
Did ask for
it.
You've asked for it relatively recently.
You also had on there during the budget hearings. Where were these questions then?
Well,
We're coming up with more and more excuses for why we didn't ask or do our part, and we're trying to put it all on the administration, and that is my problem. And the tone that you're taking is so condescending and disrespectful because you won't even acknowledge that maybe there's some things on our end that we should have done differently. But you had more ample opportunities to answer many of the questions that you've answered tonight. And I can tell you right now, the staff over the course of the last 12 months has updated us on many of these capital improvement projects. So I can't sit on this phone and allow the public to think that maybe none of these updates happened when we have talked about them ad nauseum. So if you want something listed on one report, say that. But let's not sit here at this table tonight and say.
But I do think that's,
Outstanding capital
no.
improvement projects.
It has been requested.
I appreciate
It
that.
absolutely has been requested. However, it's been requested in a particular context where, and clearly, we've got a new temporary finance director right now who would have been the person to put this together for you.
It's just, I think, during budget, you want everything kind of synthesized. And I understand what you're saying. Go ahead, because we need to wrap this up.
Director Hannah,
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, we've said that we want to purchase those police cars, the 5. Do we need a piece of legislation on Monday to make that purchase, to authorize that purchase?
Or-
It's in this, it is in this document which transfers the money into the correct account. But do we also need an additional just piece of legislation to purchase them?
I think we have it.
Yeah, that's on this
It's
list.
been introduced.
Yeah, that was, let's see.
So we're good to go then? Okay, thank you.
233 and maybe 234.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have just one real quick request for Mr. Phelps. Call him, and I don't expect you to answer this at all, but I maybe just take this with you.
Okay.
This came to me while we were talking. Are all our IRS payments up to date? This is what I'd like to know. And if we've incurred any penalties from delinquent bills, whether it be, IRS or any other pay.
Oh, we absolutely have, but I think that we should probably have a conversation about that in another setting.
Oh, no, I'm not, believe me, I'm absolutely not trying. But what I didn't want to do was ask this question of Mr. Phelps on Monday. I want to ask that now so that,
I think that
maybe,
we should have a conversation with the law director before.
okay.
initiating
Yeah,
that
let's talk about this.
Okay, I didn't realize that I would be going that way,
conversation.
but okay,
I don't have the answer to the data, but some other
okay.
alien issues.
All right, is that something we can discuss on Monday after we have, a private discussion?
Why don't we talk before the meeting?
Okay,
Tomorrow or Monday or over the weekend or something.
all right. All right, again, apologies for this going so long. This meeting is adjourned at 9:01.